Chapter 648. Predecessors plant trees, descendants enjoy the shade. Nianfeng's eyes are sad. I was kind-hearted, so I dug a tunnel to make it convenient for descendants to enter and exit, leaping over 1,000 worries. Green Eyebrows was confused, not knowing what he meant. Nan Hai Nongzhu came here. Yu Qianqiu. There are quite a lot of people here. Lu Mei's eyes suddenly froze. There was a line of handwriting on the hard iron without any pause. Obviously, it was written in one go. It could be seen that the person's cultivation was obviously higher than the previous two. He could not help but murmur, "The world is lonely and invincible, but I have no fate to ascend to heaven. I have long heard that the netherworld is equal to the world of immortals and wants to find a strong opponent. What a reckless human cultivator. How arrogant." He was already laughing sinisterly at the end of the sentence. "By Changchun, the world is invincible. It seems that you are the one who stole the knocker. Ordinary people can't reach the gate of the underworld." Lu Mei laughed sinisterly. He had already found the target he was looking for. He turned into a green light and flashed out of the 9th netherworld cave. However, he hadn't gone far when he reappeared and stopped. He looked at the tunnel under his feet and then at the eye of the wind in front of him. After a moment of shock, he finally understood what the line of words meant. It turned out that someone had dug a tunnel in the netherworld cave and wanted it to be convenient for the descendant to enter and exit. Yu Qianqiu. Another reckless guy. Hee. I didn't expect the human cultivator to be so arrogant that he dares to destroy the things in front of the underworld. After a sharp laughter, the green light floated up and directly passed through the eye of the wind and disappeared. Outside the 9th netherworld cave, everyone stared at the entrance for a long time. After a moment of hesitation, Sai Zhangfei and Zhang Ling suddenly cupped their hands and said to Yu Ji, "Madam, I would like to go to the 9th netherworld cave to find out what is going on." Yu Ji shook her head gently and said, "No need, you can't go deep inside. No one knows what is going on inside. Breaking in by force is tantamount to suicide. Let nature take its course. It will explode, as long as it doesn't affect us." Before he could finish his sentence, he heard a gasp of surprise from the crowd. A green light flashed out of the cave and turned into a person floating in the air, looking around curiously. The person was tall and thin, wearing a brocade green robe. The most peculiar thing was that there was a pair of green eyebrows on his pale face. No one could see through his level of cultivation, and he came from the 9th abyss cave. Everyone looked at each other, and they had a faint guess that they did not dare say out loud. Beside the 1,000-mile lake of the obedient island, Bai Changchun, who was standing with his hands behind his back, had been paying attention to the movements in the mirror. When he saw the green-robed man coming out from the 9 netherworld cave, he immediately raised his hand and put away the mirror. He disappeared without hesitation and flashed in the direction of the Chanchili Wind Valley. On the cliff, Yu Ji gave Ghost General Zhang Ling a meaningful look. The latter took a step forward, cupped his hands and said, "May I know which expert has graced us with his presence in the Valley of Chilly Wind?" The green-robed person ignored his question and coldly checked everyone's cultivation. He didn't find anyone worth mentioning. None of them seemed to be people who could easily leave words on the netherworld iron. He couldn't help but shake his head and laugh in a shrill voice. What a group of pitiful people. After death, they didn't go to the underworld to serve the emperor of the underworld. Instead, they stayed in the human world and became neither human nor ghost. I am the underworld messenger. I have something to ask you. Who is your leader? Come out and answer. The underworld messenger? Everyone was shocked. Just as they had guessed, they all became uneasy. Although Yu Ji was afraid, as the leader, others could retreat, but she couldn't. She squeezed out a smile and bowed. "I am the Lord of Chilly Wind Valley. What does the underworld messenger want to ask?" "Oh, a woman?" The green-robed person glanced at the ghost generals. She didn't expect the leader to be a woman. A trace of disgust flashed in her eyes. She said indifferently, "I ask you something. You have to answer honestly. Otherwise, you will have to bear the consequences. Let me ask you, do you know who stole the knocker from the gate of the underworld?" Hearing this, everyone was shocked again. They didn't expect that someone would dare to steal from the gate of the underworld. Yuji forced herself to be calm and shook her head. We really don't know about this. The green-robed person snorted coldly. As the master of this place, how can you not know? Do you want me to punish you before you will tell the truth? Please calm down, underworld messenger. Yuji smiled apologetically. The gate of the underworld is a legendary thing to us. Nobody has seen it. With our cultivation, we won't be able to get there. If someone could get there, their cultivation would definitely be higher than ours. It would be a piece of cake for them to hide from our eyes and not be discovered. The green-robed person thought for a while and nodded slightly. This is the truth. I don't think you dare to lie to me. Let me ask you again. Who has the highest cultivation in this world? Who is invincible? Yuji subconsciously thought of Bai Changchun, but she didn't dare to speak nonsense. She replied again, Underworld Messenger, you don't know this. This place is called the Demon Ghost Domain. It is a place where demons and ghosts live together. We live here and never ask about the affairs of the human world. In addition, our cultivation is low, so we don't dare to ask. So, we really don't know who has the highest cultivation in this world. What a group of pitiful people. The green-robed person looked at everyone and shook his head with pity. It was as if he was showing off how happy his life in the underworld was. He then asked, let me ask you again. Do you know where a person called Bai Changchun is? Hearing this, the ghost generals suddenly felt a little uneasy. Green eyebrows glanced at them and saw everyone's actions. Then, he laughed and said, it seems that you all know this person. I'll tell you the truth. This Bai Changchun is the biggest suspect for stealing the knocker. If you hide anything from me, I'll treat you as an accomplice and punish you severely. Tell me, where is this person? Yuji wanted to say that she didn't know, but everyone lost their cool. It was impossible for her to say that she didn't know. However, she didn't dare to reveal Bai Changchun's location. She rolled her eyes and said perfunctorily, this person has been here before, and his cultivation is very high. She raised her hand and pointed to the west. Go west. There is a place where many soul formation experts live. I heard that person lives there. Her words were more or less a test. She deliberately said that there were many soul formation experts. She wanted to see how the underworld messenger would react. If he was afraid, then there was no doubt that this person was not a match for the torture envoy. At the same time, she could use the time when he was sent away to quickly rush to the torture envoy to report. With the torture envoy around, there was nothing to be afraid of. However, what she didn't know was that her random pointing had caused a lot of trouble for the group of soul formation experts in the treasure basin. The green-robed person looked to the west and nodded. Go west, right? I hope you didn't lie to me. Otherwise, think about the consequences yourself. As soon as she finished speaking, she flew up to the sky and easily passed through the protective array. Once she flashed to the sky above the demon ghost region, she immediately raised her hand to cover her eyes. Under the strong sunlight, she felt really uncomfortable. After she got used to it, she cursed, damn the sun. She turned into a green light and fled to the west. As soon as the green-robed person left, the ghost generals below immediately started discussing. Yuji was even more dazed. She said that there were many soul formation experts in the west, but the underworld messenger was still not afraid. Obviously, his cultivation was very high, and he didn't care about the soul formation experts at all. If even the torture envoy was not a match for him, she would have to face terrible consequences. The ghost generals were not fools. They naturally knew the consequences of the madam's words. After a long silence, Zhang Ling walked over worriedly and asked, Madam, what should we do? When Yuji heard this, she quickly restrained her emotions, and a confident look of encouragement appeared on her face. Lord Disciplinary Envoy is famous throughout the world, and his cultivation base is unfathomable. Don't worry, everyone. I'll head to Obedient Island right now to report the details to Lord Disciplinary Envoy. Everyone looked at each other. Although she said that, the other party was an envoy from the underworld. His cultivation was definitely not ordinary, so it was strange that they didn't worry. However, Zhang Ling cupped his hands and said with an unusually firm tone, "I am willing to accompany you to Shantian Island." Yu Ji smiled indifferently and nodded slightly. Just as she was about to say something, she saw Zhang Ling and the group of ghost generals kneeling down in terror and bowing, "Greetings, Lord Disciplinary Envoy." Yu Ji suddenly turned around and saw an old man in a green robe standing behind her. He seemed to be staring at the entrance of the 9th Netherworld cave. Looking at his back, who else could it be but the torture envoy? She was so scared that she immediately knelt down and said, "Yu Ji greets the torture envoy." Bai Changchun slowly turned around. His eyes were shining brightly on his thin face. He glanced at the people kneeling on the ground, and his gaze finally landed on Yu Ji, who was kneeling on the ground. With an emotionless tone, he asked, "Where did the man in green go?" Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect that the torture envoy already knew what happened here. Otherwise, how could he know that there was a man in the green robe? Yu Ji immediately repeated the conversation between her and the man in the green robe in detail. She didn't dare to hide anything. Bai Changchun looked to the west and snorted expressionlessly, "The underworld envoy? That's exactly what I want. As long as I'm here, how can you people from the underworld do as you please? Let me deal with you." As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared. A white hole appeared in the west corner of the protective formation, and then it slowly closed. The people kneeling down only dared to stand up after a long time. They all opened their eyes with lingering fear and disappointment. Thinking of the torture envoy's words, they were all speechless. The torture envoy was indeed the torture envoy. From what he said just now, he went to chase after the underworld envoy. In the treasure bowl, Yu Qianqiu, who was surrounded by a huge cyan halo, stood in the air. He raised his head and glanced at the sky. With a murderous aura, he shouted again, "Yan Zhuixing, if you still don't come out, prepare to collect your first senior brother's corpse." The onlookers were in an uproar. They once again witnessed Yu Qianqiu's arrogance. Man who was in the air, said sternly, "Yu Qianqiu, aren't you afraid of biting your tongue? If it wasn't for Senior when backing you up, we might not even know who would be collecting the corpse." Chapter 649. What a stubborn duck. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly. Numerous sword shadows wrapped around him and rose to the same height as Man Hu. He said indifferently, "Are you interested in a duel with me? We'll fight to the death. Don't run away. Those who die can only blame it on their bad luck. If you can kill me, I'll say this in advance. Senior One won't look for trouble with you. Everyone can be my witness. Do you dare?" With Yu Qianqiu's current means, he didn't care about experts at the late stage of crossing tribulation. The only problem was that his cultivation was still lacking. If he fought with experts at the late stage of crossing tribulation, he wouldn't be able to catch up if his opponent used teleportation. That was why he provoked Man Hu. First, he set a rule. No one was allowed to run. It was up to Man Hu to agree. "Why wouldn't I dare?" Man Hu shouted. Regardless of whether he could win against Yu Qianqiu or not, he couldn't lose the face of Ice Palace as the chief disciple. Haha. Yu Qianqiu laughed wildly. "Good, you've got guts. Stop." An angry shout came. Bing Qingzi suddenly appeared. A group of 300 people appeared on the God of Wealth peak. All of them were lords of spirit severing stage. Their imposing manner was astonishing, but none of them looked good. Even Yin Baikong was astonishingly among them. However, his complexion was even worse than Yu Qianqiu's. His eyes were fixedly staring at Yu Qianqiu as if he wanted to skin him alive. Bing Qingzi's gaze landed on the collapsed ice palace. His hair and beard stood on end as he roared at Yu Qianqiu, "Yu Qianqiu, do you really think I won't dare to kill you? Bing Qingzi, why are you angry at a junior? What's there to say?" Wen Lanfeng, Lu Yanqing, and Nongzhu showed up at the crucial moment. Wen Lanfeng couldn't intervene in the matters between juniors. But when a group of old guys showed up, he couldn't ignore it. However, when Lan Feng had a headache. Why was this kid always causing trouble? Couldn't he just stop and rest? When Lan Feng. Bing Qingzi angrily pointed at the shop below and said, "What is the meaning of this? Don't go too far." Nongzhu glanced at it and touched her forehead speechlessly. This matter was getting out of hand. Lu Yanqing was already frowning. When Lan Feng paused and looked at Yu Qianqiu. "Put away your flying sword. What's going on? What happened?" Yu Qianqiu retorted with a question, and then he looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. The flying sword circled and danced even faster, and his killing intent erupted once again. He pointed at Man Hu and said sternly, "Man Hu, do you dare to swear that you will tell me everything that Yan Juexing did to me?" Hearing him say such angry words, everyone's gaze turned towards Man Hu. Barbarian Tiger was caught unprepared. Just a moment ago, he was ready to fight, but now, his heroic spirit suddenly turned into dodgy eyes. He couldn't tell them about Yan Juexing's demonic skill, so he was trying to think of a countermeasure. Everyone could see that something was wrong with his hesitation. Bing Qingzi was shocked when Yan Juexing was mentioned. He looked around but didn't find Yan Juexing. He immediately asked anxiously, "Man Hu, where is your junior brother?" Man Hu transmitted his voice, "Junior brother's demonic skill has been exposed. He should be hiding." But he shook his head and said, "I don't know." Bing Qingzi looked around carefully again. If he couldn't find Yan Juexing, it would be hard for others to find him. He felt a little relieved. However, there was someone who was not satisfied. Nongzhu took a step forward in the air, squinted her eyes and asked in a weird tone, "Yu Qianqiu, what did Yan Juexing do to you?" With Wen Lanfeng's support, Nongzhu didn't want to show up. But hearing Yu Qianqiu's angry words, she guessed that he must have suffered a great loss. Otherwise, he wouldn't have disobeyed Wen Lanfeng. Although he and Yu Qianqiu were always at loggerheads, he couldn't just watch as his old friend Bai Changchun's disciple was bullied. To put it more selfishly, it was the law of the jungle in the cultivation world. Only Bai Changchun's disciple bullied others. How could he be bullied by others? If he really didn't do anything, it would be hard for him to explain to Bai Changchun in the future. Wen Lanfeng also noticed that something was wrong with Nongzhu. There was a faint murderous intent in her eyes. He was a little surprised, but then he understood. If this matter wasn't handled well, Bai Changchun might get out of the demon domain and the whole cultivation world would be turned upside down. Although that old guy usually hid in the demon domain and didn't say a word, once he came out, he wouldn't stop until there was a bloodbath. Instead of letting Bai Changchun come out to fight, it was better to solve it in a small area. Wen Lanfeng immediately pulled himself together and said coldly, "Yu Qianqiu, if you have something to say, just say it. I'd like to see who's playing tricks." A silver light flashed out of the storage bag and floated in front of him. The broad body of the sword was shining with silver light. Giant silver sword. There was a cry of surprise from below. Lu Yanqing looked at Wen Lanfeng in surprise, which didn't match his temper. More than 200 lords of the spirit-severing realm also looked at each other. They hadn't figured out the matter yet, but Wen Lanfeng had already drawn his sword. It seemed that this matter couldn't be taken lightly. "Damn it. You should have done this long ago. Today, let's join hands and kill Yan Juexing." Yu Qianqiu became more courageous. He stared at Bing Qingzi and sneered, "Senior Bing, you must know why I came to the Ice Palace shop today, right? Don't talk nonsense. How would I know why a junior like you came here?" Bing Qingzi denied flatly. His eyes were also faintly filled with killing intent. He had wanted to take this opportunity to silence Yu Qianqiu, but Wen Lanfeng had also sensed that something was wrong. Wen Lanfeng was staring at him like a tiger watching its prey, not giving him any chance. You can't escape the truth even if you don't admit it. Yu Qianqiu snickered and surveyed the surroundings as he said, "I've long heard that Yan Juexing possesses a peerless mystical art. I didn't believe it at first, but I experienced it for myself today. What a powerful demonic art. If I didn't have some special skills, would have lost my life. Demonic art. There was an uproar in the surroundings. When Lanfeng and Nongzhu looked at each other, not knowing whether it was true or not. Bing Qingzi shouted angrily, "You Qianqiu, don't make irresponsible remarks. It's not your turn to talk nonsense here." The lid of the pot was lifted a little, revealing the aroma of meat. Even the wolves couldn't help but smell it. Pei Fong, who was in front of the crowd, smiled with his fat face shaking. "Brother Bing, he hasn't finished speaking. Why are you so anxious? If it's really nonsense, everyone will naturally know what's going on." Then he turned to Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, "Yu Qianqiu, can you explain the devil technique you're talking about a bit more clearly? It would be best if you explain everything in detail so that everyone can judge whether it's right or wrong. Otherwise, you'll wrongly accuse an innocent person." Then he turned to the people around him and shouted, "Everyone, don't you agree?" "Not bad, not bad." A lot of people responded. Most of them were from Pei Fong's camp. Bing Qingzi suddenly stared at him and shouted, "Fatty Pei, what do you mean? Do you want to hit me when I'm down?" Pei Fong didn't care about him, lest he gave him an excuse. He waved his broken hand at Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, "Yu Qianqiu, speak boldly. With Brother Wen's support and so many people's support, just say it." He didn't seem to care about Wen Lanfeng's broken hand at all. How could Yu Qianqiu let go of the great opportunity to kill Yan Zhuixing in front of him? He looked around and said, "Seniors, do you still remember that I set up a stall to sell 7-star blood orchids yesterday? After the trouble, Yan Zhuixing came to me and said that he wanted to buy a lot of 7-star blood orchids and asked me to meet him at the Ice Palace shop. I thought it was true and came here today." Who knew that Yan Zhuixing immediately turned hostile after getting the orchids? First, he used an evil method called demon eye ecstasy, which was really powerful. Both of his eyes were emitting blood-red light that could take away one's soul. I didn't even know what was going on before I was controlled by him. "Yu Qianqiu, don't speak nonsense to confuse us." "Shut up." Bing Qingzi was really anxious. Anyone could tell that he was like a cornered dog that would do something desperate. He had the tendency to go berserk. Pei Fong winked at Qi Zhejuan and Ouyangde, and the three of them stood between him and Yu Qianqiu. "Yu Qianqiu, speak boldly." Pei Fong sneered. Whether it was true or not, the three of them would benefit the most from defeating Bing Qingzi. That was why the three of them were so proactive in protecting Yu Qianqiu's safety. The gloomy Yin Baikong secretly transmitted his voice to Sikongju, "Send more people to set up ambushes at all the passages of Cornucopia. Don't let Yan Zhuixing escape. It's best to capture him alive." Sikongju quietly left to make arrangements. Hee hee. Yu Qianqiu put on a fake smile and said, "I reckon that Yan Zhuixing hasn't mastered his demonic arts. Perhaps he's still in the beginning stages. After I lost consciousness for a short while, I actually recovered. I unintentionally overheard his conversation with Man Hu. It turns out that his demon eye ecstasy can turn people into his puppets. No matter how high your cultivation is, you will still be controlled by him. Furthermore, the 7-star blood orchid can help him master his demonic arts quickly. Once he succeeds, he will unify the entire cultivation world." Since he wanted to target Yan Zhuixing, it was impossible for him to not add oil to the fire. He continued to ramble, "As soon as my body returned to normal, I immediately fought with the two of them. TSK TSK. He casually threw a punch called Little Demonic Fist and actually shattered my big black saber into pieces. Amazing. My saber is a treasure saber that surpasses high-grade spiritual treasure. It actually couldn't block a single punch from him. Once he masters his demonic arts, it will be terrible. What a pity." When he saw that his demonic arts were exposed and that he couldn't kill me in a short period of time, he didn't bother me and immediately ran away. Everyone saw what happened afterward. Man Hu, the person involved, naturally knew that Yu Qianqiu was taking the opportunity to blow up the matter. He immediately shouted, "Seniors, don't listen to his nonsense. He's completely talking nonsense. He and my junior brother have a grudge in China's cultivation world. He's taking the opportunity to take revenge. Bing Qingzi also sneered, Yu Qianqiu, do you really think that we're all 3-year-old kids that can be easily fooled? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. It sounded too mysterious and they didn't know if it was true or not. But for Pei Fong and the other two, it was enough for them to blow up the matter. Yu Qianqiu raised his brows and said, it's easy to distinguish whether it's true or not. You can call Yan Zhuixing out and confront him face to face. I have a way to force out his demonic arts. Ignorant junior, who do you think I am? Do you think I have to listen to your orders? If it wasn't for giving face to the others, would you still be alive today? Bing Qingzi said with a stern expression. Just at this moment, Sikong Ju quickly flashed over and cupped his hands towards Yin Bai Kong. Master, there's news from the passageway. Yan Zhuixing has already left the treasure basin in a hurry 2 hours ago. Chapter 650. When Yu Qianqiu heard the news, he couldn't help but curse, bastard. I let him escape. The flying swords that were densely packed around his body were also withdrawn. He quickly flew to Wen Lanfeng's camp. The situation wasn't right, it was safer here. Everyone's gaze was focused on Bing Qingzi. Yin Baikong said in a deep voice, Brother Bing, how do you explain this? What do I need to explain? Bing Qingzi tilted his head and sneered, you should think about how to explain to us about the 7 treasure pill. Yin Baikong immediately lost his temper and stared coldly at Yu Qianqiu. The 7 treasure pill that was sold had already claimed dozens of lives. Until now, no one had figured out what was going on. However, Yin Baikong had already locked onto Yu Qianqiu as the biggest suspect. Pei Fong laughed, Bing Qingzi, you're trying to change the topic at the wrong time. If Yan Zhuixing didn't have a guilty conscience, why would he run? Bing Qingzi gave Man Hu a look, and the latter quickly went to his master's side. The master and disciple had their backs to the crowd, seemingly ready to fight with their lives on the line. Bing Qingzi calmly looked around and said, Fatty Pei, don't fan the flames here. Yan Zhuixing only went out for a while, who said he ran away? Hearing that Yan Zhuixing had escaped from the treasure basin, Bing Qingzi immediately felt relieved. It was a vast primeval forest outside, and more than 2 hours had passed. It wouldn't be easy to catch Yan Zhuixing again. At the very least, the various forces wouldn't be able to organize a large-scale capture like last time in a short period of time. He believed that Yan Zhuixing could handle it with his emergency ability. Since he didn't run, can Brother Bing summon Yan Zhuixing back so that we can ask him face to face? Pei Fong asked. What a joke, how would I know where he went? As Bing Qingzi spoke, he saw many people rushing towards the exit of the treasure basin. It was obvious that the various lords had already secretly ordered their disciples to search for Yan Zhuixing. He then turned to Man Hu and said, It seems that we're not welcome here, let's go. He couldn't care about anything else now. He had to find a way to help Yan Zhuixing escape first. I won't send you off. Pei Fong waved his hand generously. He glanced at Yin Baikong. The alliance of the 3 was about to collapse. After Bing Qingzi left, everyone would definitely find Yin Baikong to settle the 7 treasure pill. After forcing Bing Qingzi away and suppressing Yin Baikong, only Hu Changshu would be left. After resolving these big obstacles, Yan Zhuixing wouldn't be able to escape. Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan, and Ouyangde exchanged glances, and they couldn't help but reveal a smile on their faces. The stalemate that had lasted for so many years was finally going to end. The primeval forest outside the primeval forest had existed for God knows how long. Yan Zhuixing gathered his strength and flew wildly in the sky. Once he sensed someone in front of him, he immediately hid in the forest. When there was no movement in the sky, he flew wildly again. Yen, yang shan't, yen stay in the sect. Yen yunt don't, yen int. Yen from yen, t. He couldn't stay in the treasure basin anymore since his demonic arts were exposed. Most of the spirit-severing experts in the cultivation world were gathered in the treasure basin. He couldn't resist them with his current cultivation. He made a prompt decision and escaped from the treasure basin without hesitation. If he was a little later, he wouldn't be able to escape. Bing Qingzi alone couldn't deal with so many experts. Moreover, there was Wen Lanfeng behind Yu Qianqiu. At the thought of Wen Lanfeng, Yan Zhuixing, who was fleeing desperately, was more or less worried that Wen Lanfeng would not let Bing Qingzi and his disciple go. After all, he had attacked Yu Qianqiu, and Wen Lanfeng was obviously supporting Yu Qianqiu. If something happened to Bing Qingzi, he would lose his only backer in the cultivation world. He would have to rely on himself for everything. Yan Zhuixing touched his storage bag subconsciously and his eyes became firm. With these 7 blood orchids, he could make a comeback even without Bing Qingzi's support. That day wouldn't be too far away. Considering that something might happen to Bing Qingzi, Yan Zhuixing didn't escape to the Ice Palace. Even if Bing Qingzi was fine, he wasn't going to the Ice Palace. The lesson of being chased last time was still fresh in his mind. Presumably, various forces had already sent messages and arranged people to wait for him on the way to the Ice Palace. He just wanted to find a safe place to improve his demonic arts and cultivation with the help of the 7-star blood orchids. He wasn't worried that Bing Qingzi and his disciple would be angry at him for abandoning them and escaping alone. They should know that even if he was still in the treasure basin, they couldn't change the outcome. They couldn't protect him at all. Instead, if he escaped, there would be a chance for them to avoid a bloody battle. Because the curse on them would force them to risk their lives to save him. The only thing Yan Zhuixing couldn't figure out was why his magic ecstasy didn't work on Yu Qianqiu. Victory was already in his grasp, but in an instant, he had to flee in panic. The situation was completely reversed. He thought about it all the way, but he still couldn't figure out what the problem was. He took a deep breath and decided not to think about it for now. The right thing to do was to escape as far as possible. Now was the best time to escape. Even 1 more second would be good. Once the pursuers came, he would have to hide in the dense forest below again. Yan Zhuixing stared at the front with rapt attention as the wind blew past him. Suddenly, the pupils in his cold and firm eyes shrunk. He saw smoke rising from the distant dense forest. In such a primeval forest, there were groups of ferocious beasts. It was impossible for anyone to live here. It must be a cultivator. Yan Zhuixing suddenly disappeared in the air and turned into 3 wisps of green smoke that drilled into the dense forest below. Then, he reappeared. Then, he used the charm body movement technique. A shadow quietly stepped on the leaves and approached the place where the smoke was rising. After arriving at the destination, he gently leaned on the branch of a big tree and looked down. In the open space below, a cultivator who looked like an old urchin was rolling up his sleeves and happily roasting a golden and oily wild boar. He seemed to be enjoying it. This person was none other than third brother Xian. Ever since Lu Yanqing settled in the Wen family's shop, she let him go. Third brother Xian naturally had no objections. Without his master's restriction, he was happy and free. Then, the vast primeval forest outside the treasure bowl became his paradise. He searched for all kinds of wild animals and made up his mind to roast a wild animal that could surpass Yu Qianqiu's. Yan Zhuixing didn't know him, but he found that he couldn't see through his cultivation. The other party was obviously an expert at the tribulation passing stage. After carefully looking around and confirming that there was no one else, he waved his hand and lightly knocked on the tree trunk. Third brother Xian suddenly looked up and said, "Who is it?" However, what he saw was a pair of demonic red eyes that emitted a soul-stirring light. Third brother Xian's expression instantly became confused and the stick in his hand fell to the ground. After a while, Yan Zhuixing restrained the red light in his eyes and let out a sigh of relief. The other party's cultivation was obviously not at the soul-forming stage. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to use the demon eye ecstasy with his cultivation. Time doesn't wait for me. I have no choice but to take a gamble. Lightly floating down from the tree, he punched the bonfire on the ground with his little magic fist. With a dull thud, a deep pit was formed. After a few punches, he quickly buried the bonfire and the roasted wild boar to prevent the smoke from the fire from attracting the pursuers. Yan Juixing looked at the dazed third brother Xian and asked, "What's your name? What cultivator are you?" "Spirit Fong Valley's third brother Xian." Third brother Xian replied dully. Yan Juixing confirmed and asked, "You're Spirit Fong Valley's Lu Yanqing's disciple, third brother Xian?" "Yes." Third brother Xian replied. After getting confirmation, Yan Juixing muttered to himself. His face gradually revealed an expression of surprise and he muttered to himself, "The heavens really don't want me to die." Then he squinted his eyes as if he remembered something and said indifferently, "Dig out both your eyes." Third brother Xian heard this and without hesitation, he stuck 2 fingers towards his eyes. Just when he was about to touch his eyeballs, Yan Juixing suddenly said, "Stop." After that, he carried out a few more tests and confirmed that he really had control over third brother Xian. Only then did he relax. Previously, he was afraid of Yu Qianqiu, so he couldn't help but doubt his magic ecstasy art. So he had to test it out first before he could be at ease. After testing it out, he didn't dare to dawdle anymore. Danger could come at any time. Waking third brother Xian up from his daze, he conveyed his order and said, "Let's go." Third brother Xian quickly rose into the sky while Yan Juixing went into the dense forest. The 2 of them, one in the sky and one in the forest, maintained the same speed as they quickly headed towards Spirit Fong Valley. In the end, not long after, third brother Xian discovered the pursuers before Yan Juixing with his cultivation at the end of the tribulation passing stage. Yan Juixing quickly hid in the dense forest while third brother Xian stopped in the sky. He turned around and shouted to the others, "Who are you? Why are you chasing me?" The 5 cultivators at the middle stage of the tribulation passing stage obviously knew him. They all cupped their hands and one of the leaders answered, "So it's Senior Xian from Spirit Fong Valley." "It's a misunderstanding. We are the disciples of the World Chamber of Commerce. We were ordered to hunt down Yan Juixing who caused trouble in Cornucopia." "Senior, did you see any suspicious people passing by?" "Hunt down Yan Juixing? What trouble did he cause?" Third brother Xian said curiously, "I even met him and had a few words with him. I didn't see any signs of him running away." "Senior, you saw Yan Juixing before?" The man's eyes lit up. He cupped his hands and said, "Can you tell me which direction he went?" "I can tell you, but don't talk about hunting. Be careful, Bing Qingzi won't let you go." Third brother Xian pointed to the left and said, "He went in that direction. When you see him, talk nicely. Fighting will hurt the harmony." After knowing where Yan Juixing went, they didn't want to talk to him anymore. The leader smiled and said perfunctorily, "We will remember. We won't disturb you anymore." The 5 of them quickly turned to the left. After watching them go far away, third brother Xian set off again in the direction of Spirit Fong Valley. Yan Juixing emerged from his hiding place and followed closely in the dense forest. After the 5 of them left, they quickly sent a message to Cornucopia. The pursuers of the World Chamber of Commerce quickly gathered in the direction pointed by third brother Xian. Such a big movement naturally couldn't be hidden from the eyes of all the forces. It immediately attracted everyone to chase in that direction. Chapter 651. Yan Juixing, who was fleeing in a hurry, bumped into several groups of people along the way, but they were all sent away by third Xian. He should be happy to pass the test easily, but Yan Juixing got angrier the more he thought about it. Whenever he thought of Yu Qianqiu, he would gnash his teeth in hatred. Different from Yu Qianqiu's ostentatious style of doing things, Yan Juixing always wanted to develop in a low-key manner, but there was someone who didn't let him have his way. From the beginning in the 100 Flowers Valley until now, as long as he met Yu Qianqiu, that guy would force him to become famous together with him. Now, one of them was the world's #1 expert below the spirit severing stage, who had killed countless people, and he had offended everyone. The other one was an absolutely dangerous person with a peerless skill, who was coveted by many people. The 2 juniors from the Chinese cultivation world were famous in the world together. The difference was that the former had found a strong backer, and no one dared to touch him openly for the time being. The latter was unlucky. He only had Bing Qingzi as his backer, so he was easier to bully. Naturally, people would find trouble with him first. Yan Juexing really couldn't figure it out. Regardless of whether they were enemies or not, both of them were outstanding figures of the new generation in the cultivation world. Didn't that guy know that the tallest tree in the forest would be blown away by the wind? Before he had the ability to protect himself, it was simply courting death to face so many experts with such great fanfare. Even if he had a backer, he couldn't rely on him for a lifetime, right? It was a complete country bumpkin, a local tycoon, and a nouveau riche. It was a miracle that he didn't die today. This was Yan Juexing's evaluation of Yu Qianqiu. However, what he didn't reflect on was that since the day he was born in the Chinese cultivation world, he was destined to have a height and starting point that many cultivators couldn't reach in their lifetime. His grandfather was the leader of the #1 sect in the Chinese cultivation world of diabolism. His maternal grandfather was the leader of the #1 sect in the righteous path. He also had the halo of the young palace master of the 100 Flowers Palace. When others were still struggling in the Ruoshui River for basic living conditions, he was already standing on the beautiful mountain peak. He didn't even want to look at it. Instead, he kept a low profile and looked around at the crowd that had already climbed ashore, to see who could be of use to him. This was what he meant by being low-key. With a high-profile identity and qualifications, it was easy for him to say that he was low-key. But what did Yu Qianqiu have at that time? There was nothing. Living in the cultivation world where the strong preyed on the weak, not to mention dignity, they didn't even have the right to ensure their own survival. Ever since he joined on Kwangsung, he had been in constant danger of being devoured. If you accidentally said something wrong, even if you revealed a look that made others unhappy, they could take your life. This was something that could happen in an instant. Moreover, if he died, he wouldn't even have the chance to show himself. He wouldn't even have the right to bury his head and keep a low profile. It was not easy for him to join supporting Immortal Island, but there were always people who wanted to harm him. He did the lowliest and most despised job. He was already so low-key that he couldn't be any more low-key. He almost dug a hole to bury himself alive, but he was still in a precarious situation. In the end, he was forced to abandon his dignity as a man and knelt down to beg for help for the sake of some spiritual herb seeds that could help him turn over a new leaf. It didn't matter if he lost his face, but he still owed a favor until now. A person of noble birth like Yan Juexing would never be able to understand the pain of a small fry like Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu sometimes looked back at the few women he met along the way. Bai Suzhen had never looked at him differently because of the change in his status. She had always helped him unreservedly. When he was tired, she was a trustworthy harbor that he could rely on. Furong also wouldn't look down on him because of his lowly status. On the contrary, from the moment the two of them met, he started to bully her. Yu Qianqiu was the only pure person left in this world until now. She treated his words as an imperial edict and did whatever he told her to do without any consideration. Yu Qianqiu couldn't imagine how guilty he would feel if he hurt her. As a result, Yu Qianqiu was in fear and trepidation. He was afraid that this girl would suffer even the slightest grievance. Whatever she wanted, Yu Qianqiu would satisfy it at all costs and put in all his effort to protect her. In fact, Furong wouldn't make any excessive requests of him. With the existence of these two women, Yu Qianqiu's heart was incomparably strong. He had the confidence to face any difficulties. Even if his final outcome was to be beaten into a cripple with 4 limbs missing, he did not lose everything. He still had the most precious thing. He had no reason to believe that these two women would still wholeheartedly accompany and take care of him for the rest of his life. They could stand the test of time. Even if he had the backing of the world's #1 expert, Bai Changchun, it wasn't as reassuring as these two women's soft shoulders. As for the other women, if he didn't have the corresponding strength to conquer them, would they fall in love with a little cultivator who was at the mercy of others? Yu Qianqiu believed that they were also good women. However, he subconsciously didn't dare to think too deeply about it. He just constantly gave himself confidence that they were also very good women. They were very good to him, very good. Yu Qianqiu was a small character struggling in the endless weak waters of the cultivation world. He struggled to stay alive in the endless weak waters of the cultivation world. When he finally climbed ashore and wanted to rest, he found that there were ferocious beasts eyeing him covetously. A good person had become a rare animal. There were only two paths for him to choose. He could either live with his tail between his legs like most people, or he could risk his life to stand out and fight for his own rights. He chose the latter without any hesitation. Yan Juexing had the capital to be low-key, but Yu Qianqiu didn't. The latter wanted to quickly stand out and get rid of the precarious situation, so he could only prepare to be low-key and be a high-profile person. When his crazy method started to make people afraid, he was no longer a small cultivator that everyone could bully. At the very least, those cultivators at the same level as him didn't dare to provoke him anymore. His reputation rose, and many big figures who couldn't come into contact with him in the past began to notice his existence and reached out to recruit him. Yan Juexing had also noticed him at that time and wanted to take him in for his own use. Until now, Yu Qianqiu's reputation in the various countries could be said to be notorious. However, he still managed to carve out a path of blood and successfully protected himself. At the very least, other than the top soul formation experts in the cultivation world, cultivators below the soul formation stage didn't dare to easily find trouble with him. This was the difference between Yan Juexing, who was born with a noble background and acted low-key, and Yu Qianqiu, who was born with a grassroots background and acted high-key. It was because everyone's starting point was different. There was no such thing as country bumpkin, local tycoon, or nouveau riche. At the end of the day, everyone wanted to succeed by hook or by crook. There were also many people who died in Yan Juexing's hands. Different paths led to the same goal, and it all depended on who won in the end. Swoosh! The giant silver sword blocked in front of Bing Qingzi and his disciple who were trying to leave the cornucopia. The atmosphere suddenly became solemn. It seemed that when Lan Feng was starting to stand up for Yu Qianqiu, Pei Fong and the other two looked at each other and laughed in their hearts. It couldn't be better to directly get rid of Bing Qingzi through Wen Lanfeng's hands. Yu Qianqiu was also full of excitement. He didn't kill Yan Juexing, but it was also good to kill his backer. This guy's thinking was very simple. As long as it was his opponent's power, he would not let it go if he could eradicate it. The weaker the opponent, the stronger he would be. Bing Qingzi secretly cursed. It would probably be hard for him to have a good ending today. He turned to stare at Wen Lanfeng and said, "Wen Lanfeng, I have no enmity with you." "What do you mean by this?" Wen Lanfeng's body began to emit a threatening aura. His long hair gradually fluttered behind him. He stared at Bing Qingzi ruthlessly and said indifferently, "What do I mean? Do I still need to explain?" The spirit-severing stage experts in the air retreated one after another. Once these two guys started fighting, the remaining power would be very frightening and could easily harm the innocent. Bing Qingzi also knew that he was no match for Wen Lanfeng. It was meaningless for him to risk his life. He looked at Lu Yanqing, who was wearing a gauze hat, and said, "Miss Lu, my ice palace has always been very respectful to Spirit Fong Valley. Every year, we would send disciples to collect snow spirit grass and offer it. I hope Miss Lu can plead for this old man from Brother One on account of our many years of friendship." He was flexible and good at finding people. He found Wen Lanfeng's nemesis in an instant. As a result, Wen Lanfeng's threatening aura weakened a little before Lu Yanqing opened her mouth. Pei Fong and the others frowned at the sight. Lu Yanqing was silent for a while. She tilted her head to look at Wen Lanfeng and sighed slightly. Does everything need to be solved by fighting and killing? Although her words didn't sound like she was pleading for Bing Qingzi, it was no different from stopping Wen Lanfeng from fighting. In the end, Wen Lanfeng didn't say a word. The giant silver sword whooshed back into his storage bag. Bing Qingzi cupped his hands at Wen Lanfeng and said, "Thank you for your mercy, Brother Wen." Then he cupped his hands at Lu Yanqing and said, "I will remember Miss Lu's kindness. As long as the Ice Palace is here, if Spirit Fong Valley encounters any trouble, the Ice Palace will definitely do its best to help. Farewell." The master and disciple quickly flew away. Wen Lanfeng looked at Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu apologetically, seemingly hoping that they would understand. Nongju was speechless, but there was nothing she could do. She couldn't stop being Qingzi. Everyone didn't expect that a big battle would be resolved by Lu Yanqing's words. Yu Qianqiu was both angry and amused. He didn't expect Lu Yanqing's words to have such a great influence on Wen Lanfeng. Wen Lanfeng didn't think that at this point, everyone's position was already clear. Those who were enemies couldn't be let go. Maybe people will accept Lu Yanqing's feelings, but they won't necessarily accept your Wen Lanfeng's feelings, because everyone knows that you and I, Yu Qianqiu, are on the same side, but I, Yu Qianqiu, and Yan Juixing are sworn enemies. For the first time, Yu Qianqiu had the idea of stripping Lu Yanqing naked and throwing her on the bed to vent his anger. This woman was too bullshit. If you don't know anything, don't get involved. In the cultivation world, if problems could be solved by talking nicely, then everyone would ask you to be the peacemaker. What's the point of fighting? What's the point of fighting? What's the point of fighting? There were some words that had to be said. Yu Qianqiu stared at Lu Yanqing and said in a low voice, Senior Lu's compassion is really admirable, but I have a word of advice for you. You let the Ice Palace people go today, but if they hurt Spirit Fong Valley in the future, I hope you won't regret it. Yu Qianqiu. Stop it. Nongju frowned and stopped him. Wen Lanfeng smiled apologetically and said, Yu Qianqiu, I'll let it go this time. Next time, you're too kind, senior. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand to interrupt him and said indifferently, it's better to rely on yourself than on others. I won't bother you next time. I just hope Senior Wen and Senior Lu can fulfill their promise. Chapter 652. Wen Lanfeng and Lu Yanqing were speechless. Everyone could tell that Wen Lanfeng and Lu Yanqing were drawing a clear line. Everyone felt it was incredible. Yu Qianqiu was really bold. He dared to speak to Wen Lanfeng and Lu Yanqing in such a tone. Didn't he know that without Wen Lanfeng's protection, there were too many people here who wanted his life? However, the two people involved were well aware that Yu Qianqiu was fully qualified to speak to them like this because of his identity as Bai Changchun's disciple. On the contrary, the two dared not speak too harshly to Yu Qianqiu. Even if Lu Yanqing was the most beautiful woman in the world, she still felt a lingering fear when she thought of the terrifying figure behind Yu Qianqiu. That old man wouldn't care how beautiful you were, and he wouldn't show mercy to you just because you were a girl. No matter how beautiful you were, in his eyes, you were just a bag of stinky skin. If you made him unhappy, he would directly consider whether you still had the need to live. It was a completely inhuman way of thinking, and the way he dealt with things was frighteningly direct. When Lanfeng nodded silently and said, Don't worry, I will do what I promised you. Yu Qianqiu turned to Nongju and said, Let's go. Take them with us. The two people he was referring to were Furong and Zi. You. Nongju shook her head, not knowing what to say, then nodded. The two were just about to leave when they suddenly heard someone shout, Stop. The two looked back and saw Hu Changshou flash out. He cupped his hands to Wen Lanfeng and said, Brother Wen, this kid's words were too arrogant. He didn't put you in his eyes. There's something I'd like to ask Brother Wen about. Does this brat mean that he has nothing to do with Brother Wen from now on? Wen Lanfeng suddenly looked at Hu Changshou, his eyes filled with killing intent. Hu Changshou, what do you want to say? I won't lie in front of Brother Wen. Hu Changshou stared coldly at Yu Qianqiu and said, If he really has nothing to do with Brother Wen, I want to settle the score with him for killing my Yun Palace disciple. If I still have a close relationship with Brother Wen, then I have no choice but to give Brother Wen face and let this matter drop. At this time, Wen Lanfeng naturally wanted to support Yu Qianqiu, but who knew that before he could speak? But he heard Nongju shout, Wen Lanfeng, from now on, Yu Qianqiu has nothing to do with you. Wen Lanfeng looked back and swallowed the words he was about to say. Nongju sneered arrogantly and said, I'd like to see who dares to hurt Yu Qianqiu. He was also furious. These people really didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. They thought that Yu Qianqiu could be trampled upon after leaving Wen Lanfeng. At this time, if he didn't stand out, then he would have come here in vain. Otherwise, there was no need for him to beg for Bai Changchun's jade pendant. Wasn't it just a precaution? Good, very good. Hu Changshou clapped his hands and smiled. With Nongzhu's words, I can rest assured. A black shadow flashed to his side. Yin Baikong, dressed in a black robe, stood out and said with a dark face, since you have nothing to do with Brother Wen, Yu Qianshou, it's time to settle our debt. Hu Changshou glanced at him and chuckled. I wonder what debt this kid owes you that it's worth Brother Yin to come personally. The 7 treasures pill. Yin Baikong said with a dark face, this kid sold the 7 treasures pill to me, of course I have to look for him. Before the incident, he had sent people to look for Niu Yud, hoping to discuss the next batch of limit-breaking pills and 7 treasures pill. Unfortunately, a few days had passed and not even a shadow of Niu Yud was seen. In addition to the 7 treasures pill incident, Yin Baikong had a faint feeling that something was wrong. He even suspected that he had fallen into someone's trap. If this matter was not resolved, the World Commerce Association would be in big trouble. Everyone was in an uproar. Who would have thought that the 7 treasures pill was sold to Yin Baikong by Yu Qianshou? Wasn't it refined by Niu Yud? In reality, the matter of the 7 treasures pill incident was only known to the higher-ups of various parties. The news had not been spread, after all, the cause of the incident was still unclear. It's really a broken drum and a messed-up person beating. Yu Qianshou sneered and said, Yin Baikong, what does the 7 treasures pill have to do with me? I obviously didn't want to sell it to you, but you forcefully bought it from me. Moreover, this was clearly a transaction between you and Niu Yud. I didn't earn a single spirit stone, I was only an errand boy. I don't know, and I don't want to know, what's wrong with the 7 treasures pill. If there's a problem, look for Niu Yud, don't look for me. Yin Baikong said with a cold expression, if I can find Niu Yud, I won't look for you. Since you're involved in this matter, don't think of getting away so easily. Think of a way to help me find Niu Yud. At this moment, Ziyi flew over together with Hibiscus. It was Nongzhu who called the 2 of them over. Yu Qianshou was startled, and the haze on his face immediately turned into a smile. He held Hibiscus's hand and said, what are you doing here? Did someone bully you again? Hibiscus looked around with hatred in her eyes. Yu Qianshou smiled faintly and turned back to Yin Baikong, if you can't find Niu Yud, don't come to me to vent your anger. Yin Baikong opened his mouth when he saw Hibiscus's hateful gaze, but he couldn't say anything. Hu Changshou followed Yin Baikong's gaze in confusion. Although this woman's appearance was not bad, it wasn't enough to make this old pervert. His eyes inadvertently caught a glimpse of the black cloud-patterned jade pendant on Hibiscus's waist. Hu Changshou's pupils suddenly shrank, especially the word "bai" on it. His mouth slowly opened as he became dumbstruck. He finally understood Yin Baikong's feelings. The 2 top experts who wanted to take this opportunity to retaliate were instantly speechless. It was indeed not a good thing for a group of soul formation experts to have such sharp eyes. When everyone's eyes touched the jade pendant on Hibiscus's waist, they couldn't take their eyes off it. Their faces were filled with disbelief. It seemed like they had seen this thing before. Wen Lanfeng and Lu Yanqing looked at each other speechlessly. Wen Lanfeng, in particular, was a little depressed. Even if he personally showed up, he wouldn't be as deterrent as Bai Changchun's jade pendant. The group of cultivators watching from below couldn't figure out what was happening up there. Why did they all become mute? Although the group of soul formation experts gradually came back to their senses, their eyes were filled with doubt. First, they doubted Hibiscus's identity. Second, when they saw Yu Qianshou holding her hand, they doubted the relationship between Yu Qianshou and her. Nongzhu revealed a sarcastic expression. Sure enough, evil people needed to be tempered by evil people. If it wasn't for Bai Changchun's iron-blooded methods, the cultivation world would have already turned upside down. Pei Fong, with a face full of fat, swallowed his saliva with difficulty. Suddenly, with a swoosh sound, he rushed between the 2 sides. The blue-faced demon knife quickly appeared in his hand and said to the people behind him in a righteous manner, Brother Nongzhu, if you want to leave, go ahead. I, Pei Fong, am here. If anyone dares to stop you, they will have to go through me first. After saying that, he hurriedly shouted to Yang De and Qi Zhoujuan, 2 brothers, quickly come and help me. The 2 behind him heard this and quickly flashed over. In the blink of an eye, one of them wore the deadly claws while the other used the sovereign descending ruler to wait for the enemy. The 3 of them stared at Yin Baikong and Hu Changshou like tigers watching their prey. They seemed to want to escort Nongzhu and the others away at all costs. The group of soul formation experts rolled their eyes. They had seen shameless people, but they had never seen someone as shameless as Fatty Pei. Moreover, there were 2 who were willing to be shameless with him. Did these 3 guys have the qualities of the top 10 experts? Even if they wanted to flatter, they shouldn't do it like this. They have that jade pendant, do they still need you to protect them? Would Yin Baikong and Hu Changshou dare to act recklessly? The most depressed ones were Yin Baikong and Hu Changshou. The 2 of them almost fainted from anger. Did we say that we were going to fight? These 3 guys actually took advantage of this situation to play this trick. It was fine if they wanted to flatter, but they also had the suspicion of confusing the public. It was as if the 2 of them were the murderers, and the 3 of them were sacrificing themselves to save the others. They were simply not afraid of making things worse. Imagine, if the scene of this confrontation reached by Changchun's ears, that terrifying guy wouldn't even listen to an explanation. Once there was a misunderstanding, someone might die. They could be angry, but Pei Fong didn't care that much. It was not easy to come across such a good opportunity. If he didn't seize it, he would be letting himself down. As for whether or not someone would die, Pei Fong couldn't wait for someone to die, the more the better. It would be best if both Yin Baikong and Hu Changshou were dead. Furong didn't really understand the severity of the situation, but seeing that there were people who came to help at the critical moment, she immediately had a good impression of them. She weakly asked Yu Qianqiu, that fatty and the other 2 are your friends? They are so nice. The moment these words came out, Pei Fong and the other 2 were immediately full of energy. Pei Fong, in particular, was grinning so widely that he couldn't even close his mouth. The fat on his face trembled as he turned around and said with a flattering smile, he's a friend, a friend. From the first time I met Brother Yu, I've treated him as a bosom friend. If Brother Yu has any trouble in the future, don't hesitate to look for me. Oh right, I am Pei Fong. Pei Fong, Senior Pei. Furong smiled like a flower and nodded, I will remember you. Qi Zhoujuan turned his head and said with a warm smile, I am Qi Zhoujuan. Yang De turned his head and said with an even more sincere smile, I am Yang De. Furong solemnly nodded and said, Senior Qi, Senior Yang. Yu Qianqiu's expression twitched as he scratched his head. He didn't want to spoil Furong's mood. The greetings made the 3 of them so happy that they almost couldn't find the edge. Especially Pei Fong, he kept nodding his head happily and didn't seem to have any intention of confronting others. He was certain that the 2 behind him wouldn't dare to make a move. In the end, Yin Baikong and Hu Changshou were so angry that they almost vomited blood. It turned out that the 2 of them were the villains and these 3 were trying their best to reap benefits. However, they didn't dare to lose their temper at this time for fear of scaring the girl. Shameless. A group of soul formation stage lords looked down on these 3 fellows. They were too shameless. Ze could be considered as someone with some experience. She naturally knew who these people were. They were all top figures in the cultivation world. She also understood that it was all because of the jade pendant on Furong's waist. Thus, her admiration for Senior Bai soared again, and at the same time, she was extremely envious of Furong. The group of cultivators who didn't know what was going on were completely confused. This scene was too strange. However, they weren't stupid. This woman was able to scare 5 late-stage spirit-severing experts at the same time, so her background was definitely not simple. Thus, everyone kept guessing Furong's background in their hearts. Yi Cheng, who was mixed in the crowd, was even more dumbfounded. He even suspected that his eyes were playing tricks on him. Chapter 653. Ignore them, let's go. Nomju waved her hand disdainfully. She didn't want to waste any more time with these shameless people. The four of them flew towards the passage of the treasure basin. The sky was quiet. Hu Changsho and Yin Baikong, who were shouting happily just now, remained silent as they watched them leave. Just as the four of them arrived at the passage of the treasure basin and were about to leave, a shrill laughter came from above, causing them to stop. Not only them, but everyone in the cornucopia also raised their heads to look at the sky. Sure enough, there is a group of soul-forming cultivators. Looks like this is the place. A man in a green robe was muttering to himself as he stared at the ground with his arms crossed. Although his voice was soft, it was as clear as a thread into the ears of the people below. Logically speaking, the treasure basin was protected by a protective formation. Only the people inside could see what was happening outside, while the people outside could only see the clouds and mist below. However, the newcomer was able to discover a group of soul-forming cultivators, which was not simple at all. Yin Baikong, who was already angry, neglected this point. Instead, he flew into a rage and said, "Who is sneakily standing up there?" The newcomer was none other than the emissary from the underworld, Lu Mei, who was instructed by Yu Ji. Lu Mei, who was in the sky, was startled. Then, he laughed in a shrill voice and said, "Are you talking to me? How arrogant. Let me see who it is." In fact, he didn't see the people below, but the people of the underworld were very sensitive to the strength of human auras in the mortal world. Moreover, the cultivation of the people below had not reached the level where they could hide their auras, so he was able to determine who it was from above. The man in the green robe suddenly turned into a ball of green light and effortlessly passed through the protective formation. Based on the sound, he floated in front of Yin Baikong and suddenly transformed back into his human form. A pair of green eyebrows slightly raised, and his small eyes looked up and down at Yin Baikong with disdain. Then, he said in a shrill voice, "Were you the one who talked big to me just now?" Everyone was startled by him and quickly backed away. Especially Pei Fong and the other two who just ran out, they quickly moved away. One had to know that the cornucopia's defensive formation was personally set up by Yin Baikong, a late-stage deity transformation expert. Its defensive power was exceptionally strong, and even if an expert of Pei Fong's level were to force his way in, he would still cause quite a commotion. And this green-robed man who suddenly appeared actually broke in without a sound and effortlessly. In particular, the spell that could turn one's entire body into a ball of green light was something that he had never seen before. It was extremely strange. The most disturbing thing was that even with everyone's cultivation, they couldn't sense any life from this person. It was as if the person standing in front of them was a living dead. Coupled with a pair of green eyebrows and a deathly pale complexion, it gave off a feeling of extreme danger. Yin Baikong was startled, and immediately calmed down from his previous anger. His body flashed, and he quickly moved a safe distance away. He then cupped his hands and asked, "May I know who you are and what brings you here?" "Hee hee." Green eyebrows laughed and said, "How dare you? I asked you a question, but you dare not to answer. I will ask you again. Were you the one who was boasting shamelessly in front of me just now?" Yin Baikong's heart skipped a beat, but he still squeezed out a smile and cupped his hands, saying, "It was a misunderstanding just now. I didn't know you were an esteemed guest, so please forgive me for not going out to greet you." Since he couldn't figure out the other party's background, he could only feel wronged. It was better than losing his life. "It seems like you are a tactful person. It won't be difficult for me to forgive you." Green eyebrows crossed his arms in front of his chest, and indifferently swept his gaze across the crowd, as if he was looking at a group of ants that he could trample at will. His gaze finally landed on Yin Baikong, and he arrogantly said, "Kneel down and kowtow to apologize, and I can spare your life." Once these words were spoken, the crowd was in an uproar. Someone actually wanted Yin Baikong to kowtow. The group of deity transformation experts looked at each other in dismay. They didn't know where this monster came from, but he was a bit too arrogant. The gloating expression on Pei Fong's face suddenly disappeared, and he exchanged glances with Qi Zhejuan and O Yangda, their eyes filled with seriousness. It was true that they couldn't wait for Yin Baikong to die, but Yin Baikong was, after all, one of the top 10 experts on the same level as them. Normally, no matter how much they targeted Yin Baikong, they wouldn't use such a method to humiliate him. If Yin Baikong really knelt down and kowtowed, it wouldn't just be him losing face, but the top 10 experts as well. How would the cultivators of the world view the so-called top 10 experts in the future? At the entrance of the passage, Yu Qianqiu gave Nongzhu a questioning look, hoping to get an answer from the knowledgeable Nongzhu. In the end, Nongzhu slightly shook her head and transmitted her voice. I have never seen such a person. I'm afraid Yin Baikong is out of luck. At this moment, even if Yu Qianqiu racked his brains, he wouldn't be able to think that this strange person was lured out by his deeds. Yin Baikong's expression greatly changed. If this was a place with no one around, and he was forced into a corner, he might have compromised in order to save his life. But where was this place? This was the cornucopia of the World Commerce's headquarters. His disciples and grand disciples were watching from below. How could he kneel? If he really was humiliated and knelt in front of everyone, even if he obtained the entire world in the future, he would never be able to raise his head. If he was an ordinary cultivator, then it wouldn't matter, but he was one of the top 10 experts. There were different types of humiliation, and some humiliation was more difficult to bear than death for experts. Who are you? Aren't you being a little too overbearing? Yin Baikong asked with an ashen face. He didn't know what kind of bad luck he had today. Why did bad things happen one after another? A mere mortal doesn't have the right to ask who I am. Lu Mei's tone was cold and threatening. I'll give you one last chance. Are you going to kneel or not? An icy aura slowly spread out, causing the surrounding temperature to plummet. He was indeed angry. In the underworld, he knelt in front of a woman every day, so he already had nowhere to vent his anger. He didn't expect that in the human world, a mortal cultivator would actually dare to contradict him. Immediately, killing intent spread in his heart. A mere mortal? Yin Baikong's pupils shrank. From the other party's aura, he sensed an aura similar to Niu Yud's, but it didn't seem to be as strong as Niu Yud's. He immediately asked, could it be that you're from the immortal world? I also have a friend in the immortal world called Niu Yud. Do you know him? When a person was forced into a desperate situation, no matter what method he had, he would always try it. The moment these words came out, it could be said that everyone was shocked. Everyone was stunned. Niu Yud was actually from the immortal world? Everyone thought of Niu Yud's incomparably arrogant actions and immediately came to a realization. So he was from the immortal world. No wonder such a powerful expert suddenly appeared. No one knew his origin. However, everyone was more or less suspecting whether Yin Baikong's words were true or not. Nongzhu's face kept twitching. She stiffly turned around and rolled her dead fish eyes. She transmitted her voice to Yu Qianqiu. Kid, what nonsense did you tell Yin Baikong to actually make him say such nonsense? Yu Qianqiu shook his head with a sluggish expression. He really didn't know what to say. He could only silently say in his heart, Brother Yin, take care. Lu Yanqing, who was in the air, stared at him with a complicated gaze. Lu Mei was slightly startled when she heard this. She asked in surprise, you have a friend in the immortal world? What does Niu Yud do? The immortal world had always been in contact with the underworld. However, his position and cultivation in the underworld wasn't high. He was just a dispensable clown under Madame He Chi's feet. He wasn't familiar with the people in the immortal world at all. If this person's friend was someone important in the immortal world, then he wouldn't be able to provoke them. Even if he ran back to the underworld, they could still come to the immortal world to deal with him. Madame He Chi wouldn't offend a big shot in the immortal world for a clown like him. If that happened, she would kick him away like a piece of trash, without the slightest bit of mercy. Seeing that the opponent's aura was slightly weakened, Yin Baikong cupped his hands and smiled. My friend is the immortal world's emissary. Yu Qianqiu almost couldn't hold back his laughter when he heard this. Nongzhu glanced at him. She finally knew who this kid was pretending to be. It turned out that he was the emissary he mentioned before. Immortal world's emissary? Lu Mei's face was full of suspicion. The immortal world's emissary who goes to and from the immortal ascension stage in the human world? In Baikong's eyes lit up. It seemed that Niu Yu didn't lie to him. There really was such a person in the immortal world. He immediately cupped his hands and smiled. That's right. He's the immortal world's emissary who goes to and from the immortal ascension stage in the human world. Lu Mei's pale face darkened. He said in a gloomy tone, "You dare to trick me? You actually used an emissary from the immortal world to fool me." He might not dare to provoke someone with a bit of status in the immortal world, but he wouldn't put a lowly immortal in his eyes. No matter how insignificant he was in the underworld, he was still a small character who had accompanied the dignified Madame Hei Qi for a long time. Not everyone would dare to touch him when he went out. Not to mention this, his cultivation level was one level higher than that lousy emissary. In Baikong was shocked. He knew that he had overreached himself. He raised his hand in a panic, wanting to apologize. Who knew that Lu Mei would shout, "I gave you a chance to live, but you didn't want it. You dare to trick me? Hand over your life." In Baikong was indeed someone who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Once he heard this, he knew that there was no room for negotiation. Without hesitation, he teleported and disappeared on the spot. However, Lu Mei disappeared almost at the same time. Bang! A loud sound came from the sky, attracting everyone's attention. Two people appeared at the edge of the defensive formation at the same time. From the looks of it, it seemed like In Baikong wanted to teleport away, but his escape route was blocked by the other party. Before anyone could clearly see what was going on, they only saw a green light and a white light violently colliding. The powerful shockwave caused the spirit-severing experts in the air to fall down one after another. The airflow stirred up the dust, making everyone unable to open their eyes. The surrounding shops collapsed on the spot. Some of the Foundation establishment cultivators couldn't even stand steadily and were directly pushed to the ground by the strong airflow that was blowing towards them. Chapter 654. Nong Zhu's figure flashed and appeared in front of them. She quickly pushed out a wall of light with one palm, protecting the three people behind her. The sandstorm and debris were like shuttles, smashing against the wall of light with a pitter-patter. Even with Nong Zhu's help, Yu Qianqiu still subconsciously pulled Furong behind him and stared at the sky with a solemn expression. The green light and white light violently collided and separated. However, the green light remained stationary in the air, while the white light was quickly knocked back as if it had hit an iron wall. As soon as it was knocked back, the white light disappeared and a human figure was smashed down with a swoosh. Bang! The ground shook violently, and in an instant, a deep pit was smashed out of the collapsed walls. Ah! A few cultivators with low cultivation were unable to dodge in time and were smashed into the pit. After letting out a miserable scream, there was no reaction. The green light in the air revealed its true form. Lu Mei stared at the ground and laughed cruelly. "Reckless thing, you still want to escape in front of me." Cough, cough. A series of violent coughs came from the deep pit, and the coughs were heart-wrenching. Suddenly, the coughs stopped, and the white light once again shone from the deep pit. A powerful aura rapidly rotated and spread out from the deep pit like a storm. The surrounding broken bricks and stones were swept away as if they were dry weeds and rotten wood. Before the crowd could react, a black figure with a dazzling white light quickly escaped from the deep pit. It seemed as if it wanted to split the void, emitting a dazzling light that pierced through the sky. Its target was Lu Mei, who was in the air. The onlookers were overwhelmed with emotions. In Baikong obviously knew that he couldn't escape, so he took the initiative to launch a powerful attack. Among the cultivators watching from below, there might have been many who scoffed at In Baikong's action of escaping. But now, who would dare to say that In Baikong, one of the top 10 experts in the world, was a coward who ran away? Shio! The black figure with the cone-shaped white light emitted an ear-piercing sound of breaking through the air. It was like a divine arrow that was shot from a bow, breaking through thousands of kilograms. Everyone below had their hearts in their throats as they stared at In Baikong's all-out attack with wide eyes. Whether they had a grudge against him or not, they all hoped that he could defeat the enemy in one strike. How dare you? Lu Mei shouted in a shrill voice. With a swoosh, he charged towards the incoming white light. With a yeah sound, he raised a huge palm shadow and slammed it down. Bang! The air exploded, the airflow rippled, and visible patterns spread out. The white light was instantly annihilated, and a black shadow crashed down at an even faster speed than before. More than half of the shops in the treasure basin collapsed in an instant. Bang! The ground shook, and an even larger pit appeared. It's over. Yin Baikong is finished. This thought suddenly popped up in everyone's mind. It was quiet all around. Everyone stared at the newly created pit without blinking. There was no movement inside. Was he dead? The shrill laughter rose again. Green Eyebrows glanced at the crowd below and said, "Did you see that? This is the consequence of being disrespectful to me, cough cough." The sudden sound of coughing interrupted his wild laughter. Green Eyebrows couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Staring at the figure crawling up from the deep pit below, he clicked his tongue and said, "Old thing, you're really tough. You're actually not dead yet?" Inside the deep pit, the black-robed Yin Baikong lowered his head and dragged his sword. He slowly walked out with heavy steps, and silently stood at the edge of the deep pit with his sword in hand. His black robe was already tattered and covered in dust. Blood could be seen flowing out from the wound underneath. Although he was old, his neatly combed hair was now loose and messy. Mixed with the dust, it was as messy as weeds on the roadside. Ha! Ha! He slowly raised his head, and intermittent sounds came from his throat. Yin Baikong stubbornly stared at the sky, his eyes were still bright and full of expression. Suddenly, his chest heaved up and down, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. However, he continued to stare at the sky, unwilling to lower his head. "Master!" Two cries of alarm could be heard. Sikong Ju and Jing Yuankong teleported over with their swords in hand. They stretched out their hands to support Yin Baikong's arm. "Don't touch me, I can't fall yet. I don't need anyone to support me." Yin Baikong shouted, and the two disciples' hands froze in fear. Green Eyebrows, who was crossing his arms in the air, shook his head, and said with a mocking expression, "Even if he's not dead, he's not far from it. Is this your disciple? Old thing, this lord is being kind and will give you some time. If you have any last words, hurry up and say them." Ha! Sharp laughter echoed in the air. The resentment that had been suppressed for so long in the netherworld had finally found a place to vent, and he laughed very happily. It felt so good to be able to control the life and death of others at any time. Sikong Ju and Jing Yuankong stared at the sky with faces full of anger. Yin Baikong also revealed a sinister expression, but when he turned around and looked at the two accompanying disciples, he nodded his head with a gratified expression. These two disciples were not taken in for nothing. They still dared to stand out in such a dangerous moment. "You two back down, this has nothing to do with you," Yin Baikong said in a deep voice. "Master." Jing Yuankong's face was full of anxiety. Sikong Ju shook his head with a bitter smile. "If anything happens to Master, even though the world is big, where can we brothers retreat to?" What he said was the truth. The two brothers had worked for Yin Baikong and had offended countless people. If Yin Baikong died, how could others spare them? Yin Baikong's eyes turned scarlet red, and he stared at Pei Fong, who was in the crowd, and shouted angrily, "Fatty Pei, you and I have fought for a lifetime, why don't we put an end to it today? Do you dare to come out and fight me?" Pei Fong was speechless after being called out. He scratched his fat face and said with a bitter smile, "Brother Yin, why do you have to do this? Look at the situation now. Say it, will you fight or not?" Yin Baikong roared. "I admit defeat." Pei Fong shrugged his shoulders helplessly and said with a bitter face, "I know what you want to say. Don't worry. As long as your two disciples don't go against me in the future, I won't find trouble with them. As long as they don't take the initiative to cause trouble, I won't let others find trouble with them. Brother Yin, are you satisfied now?" Ian Baikong chuckled and said, "Fatty Pei, looks like you won't have a chance to win against me in this lifetime. If you don't accept it, I'll wait for you in the next life." Damn it. Pei Fong couldn't help but curse. He scratched his fat face and said, "Fine, if there's a chance in the next life, we'll fight again. This life is yours." Haha. Ian Baikong laughed wildly. After hearing the conversation between the two, the crowd couldn't help but sigh. Although they all knew that Ian Baikong didn't have a true friend in this lifetime, no one would have thought that the person he would entrust his funeral to was the enemy he had been fighting with for a lifetime. There was a good saying, the person who understood you the most was your enemy. After laughing wildly, Ian Baikong turned to his two disciples and said with a smile, "If you still have me as your master in your heart, don't let my Ian family's bloodline end. As for the World Commerce Chamber, you won't be able to keep it. Let go when you need to. Otherwise, if Fatty Pei becomes jealous, his words will be treated as farts." Pei Fong rolled his eyes and didn't retort. At this time, he couldn't be bothered to argue with him. "Are you guys done talking?" Lu Mei, who was floating in the air with his arms crossed, was getting impatient. "Get out of the way." Ian Baikong shouted at his two disciples. Sikong Ju and Jing Yuankong were still hesitant, but when they saw their master's angry glare, they bit their lips and bowed, then resolutely turned around and left. Human fire. A commotion suddenly broke out in the surroundings. Ian Baikong straightened his back, his whole body was burning with a scorching white flame, and a suffocating aura slowly spread in all directions. Meanwhile, Ian Baikong's entire being was filled with energy and vigor. Nongju shook her head slightly and sighed softly. Ian Baikong is going to risk his life. Yu Qinsho's expression was solemn. He could also see that this white flame was the human fire that only someone with a high cultivation base could ignite. Ian Baikong was clearly burning his powerful cultivation base, preparing to raise his attack power to the limit. Even if he could survive in the end, at his age, without the support of a powerful cultivation base, how long could he live? He was clearly throwing caution to the wind and had no intention of surviving. Yu Qinsho sighed, "There are so many late divine transformation realm experts, is there no one who will help him?" Nongju sneered, "They are all old foxes, knowing that they are no match for him, who would still want to die. Moreover, he doesn't have a true friend." Sigh. Ian Baikong is also forced into a corner. "You think he wants to?" As he spoke, a protective aura quickly surged out from his body, expanding to envelop everyone. Zi and Furong looked at this scene in horror, the two of them tightly holding each other's hands. When Lu Mei saw this scene, his pupils couldn't help but shrink. He sneered, "Old thing, you really are tired of living, then I'll fulfill your wish." Although he said that, two 1-meter-long green thorns suddenly appeared in his hands, flashing with a cold green light. Obviously, he didn't dare to be too careless. "I refuse to accept this." Ian Baikong roared, the white flame on his body surged, and he disappeared on the spot with a whoosh. Boom! Immediately after, there was an explosion in the air, only to see the green thorn in Lu Mei's hand blocking a huge sword aura that had suddenly appeared. The sword aura was easily defeated by him. However, Ian Baikong was nowhere to be seen. Just as the sword aura was defeated, another sword aura appeared out of nowhere and slashed wildly. Lu Mei's reaction was extremely fast, the green thorn in his hand was defeated without any hesitation. However, the sword aura that followed became more and more frequent, there were huge sword shadows everywhere in the air, but Ian Baikong was nowhere to be seen. Boom, boom. Explosions sounded continuously, gradually enveloping Lu Mei, and he wantonly slashed wildly. On the other hand, Lu Mei dealt with the attacks with ease, a disdainful sneer on his face. The battle became more and more intense, or more accurately, Ian Baikong's attacks became more and more intense, causing the weather to change. Bang, bang, bang. The protective formation of the treasure basin finally couldn't withstand the power of the two's battle anymore. The bottom of the formation exploded, and the entire protective formation completely collapsed. The cultivators below the soul formation stage were already unable to stand under the powerful pressure. The wind blades formed from the aftermath of the battle were as hard as steel. Some of the weaker cultivators were cut into pieces on the spot, their intestines spilling out. Immediately, many people fled in fear, quickly hiding behind the god of wealth peak. Chapter 655. Yu Qianqiu stared at the sky and said with a frown, "What is Yin Baikong doing? Does he want to destroy the treasure that he built with his own hands? He is using teleportation to attack." Nongzhu sighed and said, "The strength gap between the two sides is too big. Only by constantly teleporting can he barely maintain his attacking posture. Otherwise, as you have seen before, he is not an opponent of the same level at all. In a head-on fight, he can't even resist one blow from his opponent. Could a soul formation final stage expert be able to teleport indefinitely?" Yu Qianqiu was puzzled. He can't. That's why he ignited his cultivation and forced himself to use it. When he stops, he will be. Sigh. Nongzhu shook her head. It seems like this move is useless against him. The difference in strength is too big. Could he really be an immortal from the immortal world? Yu Qianqiu was speechless. He couldn't answer this question either. In the sky, the endless sword energy gradually decreased. The attacks that were as dense as rain were showing signs of weakening. The green spikes in Lu Mei's hands easily broke the incoming sword energy. Then, he cackled, "I thought you were more capable than I thought. So this is all you've got? What? You can't hold on anymore? Useless." What answered him was the sudden appearance of a figure, wielding a sword with both hands and slashing at his head. Lu Mei casually waved his green thorn and easily destroyed it. He clicked his tongue and said, "Can't even withstand a single blow. Really can't withstand a single blow." After a few fruitless attacks, Yin Baikong stopped. He floated in the air and panted heavily. His eyes were lifeless as he stared at Lu Mei. His black robe had been dyed dark red by blood. Drops of blood dripped from the tips of his feet. His face was pale, comparable to Lu Mei's. The group of soul formation stage lords stared at the sky in silence. They all knew that Yin Baikong was finished. "Don't have the strength to spin anymore?" Lu Mei laughed, "If that's the case, I won't play with you anymore. Boring." As soon as he finished speaking, he shot his green thorn at Yin Baikong's chest. It was fast and silent. A beautiful green light flashed. Suddenly, Yin Baikong, who seemed to have lost the ability to retaliate, suddenly disappeared. Green thorn pounced on empty air. Green eyebrows pupils constricted. A streak of light suddenly appeared on his left. It was as dazzling as the Milky Way, and it was like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. It was incredibly fast and almost reached his neck in the blink of an eye. This was the fastest sword strike Yin Baikong had ever unleashed in his entire life. His lifetime of cultivation and comprehension were all condensed into this single strike. It was soundless, yet it contained a powerful destructive power. He was prepared to finish the battle in one fell swoop. Even if he couldn't kill all of them, he had to teach them a lesson. The group of spirit-severing stage experts below suddenly became spirited. So it turned out that Yin Baikong was still hiding a trump card, purposely acting weak to make the opponent careless. As long as the opponent's reaction was even the slightest bit careless, it would be very difficult for them to escape this sword. At the very least, none of them believed that they would be able to dodge this sword strike. This was a sword strike that Yin Baikong had ignited his cultivation base. Even when Lan Feng, who had been silent all this while, had a trace of amazement in his eyes, or perhaps it was more appropriate to describe it as shock, however, it was this stunning strike that missed. It had clearly struck the opponent's throat, but it turned out that it had struck an afterimage. Yin Baikong's body froze in the air. The god of wealth sword that had followed him for many years shot into the distant horizon. After it left his hand, the silver streak of light brought with it the sound of thunder and wind as it disappeared into the distance. Its final destination was unknown. Who knew if it would be fated to continue its fate with its master in the future? Green eyebrows stood behind Yin Baikong. A green thorn in her hand had pierced through Yin Baikong's back, through his chest, and pierced through his heart. A section of the green thorn protruded from his chest, and beads of blood dripped down. Yin Baikong's pupils gradually dilated and lost their luster. Master. On the god of wealth peak, Sikongju and Jing Yuankong cried out involuntarily. The disciples of the World Commerce Association emerged one by one and looked at the scene in the sky in a daze. Sorrowful expressions emerged on their faces as they silently muttered in their hearts. The era of the World Commerce Association is over. The group of soul formation experts looked up at the sky, and they all had expressions of sympathy on their faces. Nong Zhu and Yu Qianqiu looked at each other. No one could have imagined that the high-spirited Yin Baikong who was preparing for the cornucopia gathering would be finished just like that. Old ghost, you're still lacking if you want to scheme against me. Don't you know how to act a little better? Your biggest flaw is that you can still float in the air. Green Eyebrow's mouth was close to Yin Baikong's ear as he laughed sinisterly. Suddenly, Yin Baikong's dilated pupils shrank and a trace of a desolate smile flashed across his face. His hands suddenly hugged the person behind him tightly. The smile on Green Eyebrow's face froze as he cried out in surprise, "Old thing, you," boom. An earth-shattering explosion drowned out Green Eyebrow's cry. A bright light exploded in the sky, and the air in this area seemed to be scared away in an instant. Nong Zhu let out a fierce snort as the protective aura she released was instantly blasted apart by the powerful explosive airflow. Fortunately, Ziyi's reaction speed was not slow. Almost at the same time when Nong Zhu's protective aura was blasted apart, her protective aura came up again. Fortunately, although Nong Zhu's protective aura was blasted apart, it was enough to offset the remaining power of the explosion. If it wasn't for Ziyi's protective aura, the four of them would have been covered in dust. Among the group of spirit-severing experts below, except for a few spirit-severing experts in the late stage, everyone else's protective aura was blasted apart. However, it was not a big deal. After all, the experts who could become lords of a territory all had similar cultivation as Nong Zhu. However, they did not have Ziyi by their side, so they were all covered in dust. However, no one cared about this now. They all stared at the sky dumbfoundedly. Unfortunately, the dust was everywhere and no one had the ability to see through it. No one would have thought that Yin Baikong's trump card actually had a hidden move behind it. He had stored a large amount of true essence to self-destruct his dantian. A late-stage spirit-severing expert was indeed a late-stage spirit-severing expert. After consuming a large amount of true essence, he still had such a powerful self-destruct ability. Fortunately, the true essence in Yin Baikong's body had already been greatly consumed. Otherwise, the self-destruction of a late-stage spirit-severing expert would not be a joke. It was estimated that many mid-stage spirit-severing experts would more or less suffer some injuries. While everyone was feeling emotional, they were all guessing what happened to the green-robed man. Guessing was just guessing. No one went up to check. Pei Fong, who was inside the protective aura, had a twitch on his chubby face. He muttered absent-mindedly, "Didn't you promise me to settle the score in your next life? You've already self-destructed. You don't even have the chance to reincarnate. What next life are you talking about? Yin Baikong. Yin Baikong. You are indeed worthy of your title as an old fox. Even when you're F*King committing suicide, you still have a hidden move. I admire you." Everyone knew that this time, Yin Baikong was really dead. He was completely dead. It was estimated that not even a piece of him could be found. Another one of the top 10 experts in the cultivation world had fallen. The dust gradually dispersed. At this moment, the god of wealth peak behind everyone suddenly let out a loud rumble. The ground shook continuously. Everyone turned their heads to look. It turned out that due to the impact of the explosion, half of the god of wealth peak had collapsed from top to bottom. There was still half of it standing there. It was an indescribably strange sight. The Hall of Wealth on top was still there. There was also that ancient pine tree. This was all thanks to Sikongju and Jing Yuankong's combined efforts. It was as if they had risked their lives to keep these two items on the God of Wealth Peak. As if sensing the disappearance of its owner, even the God of Wealth Peak was crying in a collapsing manner. With Ian Baikong's death, it was unknown whether the enormous world commerce that he had single-handedly founded would continue to exist in the cultivation world. With Ian Baikong's death, it was unknown whether cornucopia would be rebuilt and restored to its former glory. Although the dilapidated God of Wealth Peak still stood tall, the black-robed old man who had stood under the pine tree for over 1,000 years and often stroked the rough tree trunk while gazing at the sea of clouds would no longer appear. Many people present would remember the voice and appearance of this old fox who would rather die than submit because of this self-destruction. Yu Qianqiu let out a light sigh. He didn't know what to say. Actually, Ian Baikong's death was beneficial to him. At least no one would pursue the relationship between him and the elixir. However, why did he feel that Ian Baikong's death was a little hard to accept? Was it too sudden? It was hard to explain. Hee. Old ghost, you think you can scheme against me like this? You're really an ant trying to shake a tree. You overestimate yourself. A sharp and sinister laughter came from the sky, causing everyone to turn pale with fright. They saw a transparent green ball floating in the sky where the dust had dispersed. The green-robed man was standing inside, safe and sound. That green ball was obviously something similar to a protective aura. It actually blocked Ian Baikong's self-destruction. Too strong. Everyone had this thought. They didn't expect that Ian Baikong's self-destruction wouldn't injure him in the slightest. He was really too strong. The green ball disappeared, and green eyebrows landed on the ground in a flash. With his hands behind his back, he looked at everyone indifferently, as if he was looking at a group of ants. His gaze suddenly landed on Pei Fong, whose body was very conspicuous. He stretched out his hand and beckoned with his finger. You, come out, I have something to ask you. A trace of panic flashed across Pei Fong's face. He wasn't necessarily stronger than Ian Baikong. Thus, he tried his best to shrink his body, trying to shrink as much as possible. Then, he pretended to look around, as if he didn't know who he was calling. However, everyone's gaze was fixed on him. Little fatty, I'm talking about you. Green eyebrows proudly pointed at Pei Fong and said. Pei Fong knew that he couldn't hide anymore. If he knew that this matter would involve him, he wouldn't have stayed and watched the show. He squeezed out a smile on his fat face and walked out. He cupped his hands and said, I'm Pei Fong. What orders do you have for me? Don't be afraid. Green eyebrows casually waved his hand. He seemed to enjoy the feeling of someone trembling in front of him. He was in a good mood as he said to Pei Fong, Fatty Pei, let me ask, oh. How did you know that my nickname is Fatty Pei? Pei Fong curiously tried to establish a relationship. Green eyebrows was stunned. His expression returned to normal as he said, nonsense. Your surname is Pei, and you're a fatty. If I don't call you Fatty Pei, what should I call you? Pei Fong didn't seem to realize that he was being scolded. Instead, he revealed an almost exaggerated expression of reverence and said in a flattering manner, you are indeed an expert. You can even think of such a question. You really have a divine plan. Chapter 656. Lu Mei looked at him in surprise and found that this guy's flattery was as good as his. But the feeling of being flattered and being flattered were two completely different things. He enjoyed it very much. But the group of lords at the spirit severing stage had goosebumps all over their bodies. A dignified late spirit severing expert actually behaved like this. It was like heaven and earth compared to Ian Baikong, who would rather die than submit. But they just felt uncomfortable and didn't mean to look down on him. How many of them hadn't experienced bowing and scraping before? They just didn't fawn as disgustingly as Pei Fong. Fatty Pei, cut the crap. Although Lu Mei said so, there was a trace of appreciation in his eyes. Let me ask you, who here is called by Changchun? His eyes fell on Wen Lanfeng, Hu Changshou, Ouyang De, and Qi Zhujuan. These four were the ones with the highest cultivation. Ah! Pei Fong screamed and then asked hesitantly, You You are looking for Bai Changchun? To be exact, he was startled, and so were the others. Even if the person in front of them might be from the immortal world, it didn't seem to be more frightening than Bai Changchun. After all, Bai Changchun's despotic power had suppressed them for so many years that they were all scared to the bone. Everyone looked at each other. Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu looked at each other. Who was this person? Why did he come here to look for Bai Changchun? Was Bai Changchun also in contact with people from the immortal world? Lu Mei narrowed his eyes and took in everyone's reaction. He smiled and said, "It seems that Bai Changchun is here." Who is Bai Changchun? Come out and answer me. The surroundings were quiet and no one dared to say anything. Then again, after being suppressed by Bai Changchun for so many years, who dared to talk about Bai Changchun in front of so many people? After waiting for a while, no one spoke. Lu Mei's green eyebrows trembled and he sneered, "Fatty Pei, point out to me who is Bai Changchun." Pei Fong was shocked. Whether it was Bai Changchun or this strange green-robed man, he couldn't afford to offend them. He didn't know if these two were friends or enemies, but from the way they spoke, it was more likely that they were enemies. It was better to figure it out before dealing with them. Thus, with a face full of smiles, he nodded and bowed as he asked, "May I know why you are looking for Bai Changchun?" If someone else had asked a question instead of replying, Green Eyebrow would have been unhappy. However, Pei Fong's respectful attitude made him feel comfortable. He snorted coldly and said, "Bai Changchun, you destroyed the gate to the underworld and angered the underworld emperor. He sent me here to punish you. Why do you think I'm looking for him?" It was so quiet that one could hear the chirping of birds in the distant forest and the gentle breeze. Everyone was stunned. Bai Changchun had actually reached the legendary underworld gate and even destroyed it. The number one expert in the world was indeed the number one expert in the world. He was too bold to actually dare to mess with the netherworld. As a result, even the legendary emperor of the underworld was alerted, and this person was actually an emissary from the underworld? No wonder it was so powerful. Nongzhu rolled her dead fish eyes and slowly tilted her head to stare at Yu Qianqiu. The latter's face twitched as he smiled embarrassedly. Now the two completely understood. It turned out that the destruction of the underworld gate had attracted this god of plague. Yin Baikong's death was a little unjust. Bai Changchun was also wronged. But what Yu Qianqiu couldn't figure out was why the other party didn't look for him, the culprit, but his master. He looked at Nongzhu with an inquiring look. Nongzhu transmitted her voice with extreme disdain, "No need to guess. It must be the trouble caused by the words left on the wall of the underworld cave. Otherwise, no matter how famous your master is, the people of the underworld wouldn't know his name. When you go back, quickly erase the words on the wall for me." It seemed that having bad handwriting had its benefits. At least it wasn't that easy to recognize. Yu Qianqiu didn't say anything. Pei Fong had a dull expression on his face. He really didn't know what to say. But Green Eyebrow wouldn't let him get away with it. He asked again, "Fatty Pei, who is Bai Changchun? Point it out to me, or else." Humph. Pei Fong's face was bitter, and he was almost crying. He wanted to test whether the strange green-robed man was Bai Changchun's friend or foe. If it was a friend, he would naturally tell the truth. If it was an enemy, he could also tell the truth. It would be great if he could get rid of Bai Changchun with the help of the strange green-robed man. Bing Qingzi ran away, and Yin Baikong died. If Bai Changchun, who was above him, also died, he would be very comfortable in the future. But he never thought that Bai Changchun would dare to provoke the underworld. This was a little too ridiculously strong. In this case, if Bai Changchun and the strange green-robed man fought, it was still uncertain who would win. But if Bai Changchun won, how could he let go of the informant? If he lied, the green-robed man would definitely get even with him. It was difficult. The group of lords of the soul formation stage also looked at him with sympathy. They could all understand his feelings. "Do you want me to force you to say it?" Green Eyebrow was a little impatient. Pei Fong had no other choice. He had to get through this first. He was just telling the truth. Bai Changchun shouldn't be so petty, right? He coughed and said with a wry smile, "It's not that I don't want to point it out, but Bai Changchun isn't here at all. Bai Changchun is the world's #1 expert. He lives in the demon domain all year round. Why would he hang out with small figures like us?" His words were very respectful to Bai Changchun. He completely had an attitude of not offending either side. The world's #1 expert? No wonder he dares to say that he's invincible in the world. Green Eyebrow sneered. Suddenly, he was startled and his eyes flickered. "You said Bai Changchun lives in the demon domain?" He remembered that the female ghost cultivator had said that the place shrouded by the dark clouds was the demon domain. "That's right." Pei Fong explained, "Bai Changchun is the world's #1 expert. He leads the thousands of demon kings and ghost king in the entire demon domain. He is the master of the demon domain." Hee hee. Green Eyebrow suddenly laughed sharply. He understood everything and instantly said with a murderous expression, "So he is the master of the demon domain. No wonder that female ghost cultivator dared to lie to me. When I go back, the first person I'll deal with is you, bitch. I'll let you know what it means to beg for death." As soon as he finished speaking, his whole body turned into a green light and flew away. Seeing him leave just like that, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Looking at the messy treasure bowl, everyone was speechless. However, at this moment, another green light flashed in the sky and turned into a human figure. Who else could it be but the strange green-robed man who had just left? Why did he come back? When everyone's heart was pounding, Green Eyebrow pointed to Pei Fong, who was surprised, and said, "Fatty Pei, let me ask you again. Who are Nanhai Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu? Where do these two people live?" Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu were stunned when they heard this. Now they were 100% sure that it was the words left on the ghost cave that caused the trouble. Both of them were blaming their own hands in their hearts. Yu Qianqiu wanted to slip away immediately. He said to Nongzhu, "Let's go. While he doesn't know who we are, let's go quickly." Nongzhu agreed. The two of them grabbed Ze and Furong and wanted to run away. "Stop." With a sharp shout, Green Eyebrow's eyes locked directly on them. There was no other reason. When he said that, everyone subconsciously turned to look at them. Their eyes betrayed them. The four of them paused and slowly turned around. Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu had the same bright and harmless smile on their faces, but Ze and Furong were obviously very afraid. Green Eyebrow pointed at them and said, "Come here." Yu Qianqiu secretly transmitted his voice to the three of them, "Don't be afraid. I'm here. He can't do anything to us. Follow me closely. Don't be too far away from me. When the critical moment comes, I have a way to help you escape." "Damn it. Brat, why are you still pretending to be mysterious at a critical moment? I know you're good at escaping. If you want to escape, you should do it now. Why are you waiting for the critical moment? If you wait any longer, I'll be scared to death. Hurry up." Nongzhu secretly transmitted his voice and urged. Yu Qianqiu didn't bother to pay attention to him. He wouldn't reveal his last secret unless it was absolutely necessary. Then, he held Furong's hand and gave her a firm look that said, "Trust me." When Furong saw that, she was relieved. She didn't even want to think about it and believed him without any reason. Quietly, she was led away by him by the hand. "Bastard, I'll deal with you later." Nongzhu secretly transmitted his voice and complained. But she had no choice. With her cultivation, she couldn't escape with Ze at all. She could only place her last hope on Yu Qianqiu. So, she pulled Ze and followed closely behind Yu Qianqiu. When the four of them came in front of Lu Mei, Yu Qianqiu squeezed Furong's hand and let go. He cupped his hands and said, "May I know why Lord Envoy of Hell is looking for us?" Lu Mei glanced at Yu Qianqiu. Suddenly, her pupils shrank. She realized that she couldn't see through his cultivation. She was secretly shocked. She slowly turned to Pei Fong and asked, "Who are the four of them?" Pei Fong looked at Furong and stuttered. He didn't know what to say. Yu Qianqiu quickly changed the topic. He smiled and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, Lord Envoy of Hell is looking for Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu? I know where they are. Everyone looked at each other suspiciously. They didn't know what Yu Qianqiu was trying to do. However, they admired his courage. He wasn't afraid at all in the face of such a terrifying monster. Lu Mei looked at his calm face and became more and more suspicious. Why didn't he notice the 4 people in the corner at the beginning? Oh, he said, then tell me where they are. I don't have time to talk nonsense here. He was in a hurry to leave. Although he was arrogant before, he had accumulated the mentality of a small person over the years. It couldn't be changed so easily. He instinctively thought that this person was not afraid of him at all. In addition, he couldn't see through his cultivation, so he was more or less afraid. What kind of person was Yu Qianqiu? In his previous life, he had mingled with the nobodies in the marketplace. It could be said that he was very familiar with the mentality of those nobodies. He could tell at a glance what kind of character the other party was. He was a coward. Now that he had a way to protect himself, his face turned cold. He slowly put his hands behind his back. He stared at Lu Mei and walked toward her step by step. Chapter 657. Boy, do you want to die? What do you want to do? Nongzhu transmitted her voice anxiously. Everyone else was also looking at Yu Qianqiu with the same thoughts in their minds. Yu Qianqiu ignored him. In his previous life, he had made a name for himself among all sorts of people. Even though he was a hoodlum and his nature was hard to change, the aura of a superior was not something that could be faked. Lu Mei was also a man who acted according to the situation. Naturally, he could tell at a glance that this person's aura was not ordinary. Seeing him approaching step by step, he felt an inexplicable fear in his heart. He wanted to step back subconsciously, but he forced himself to hold back. He said in a low voice, "What do you want to do?" 2 meters away from him, Yu Qianqiu stopped. If he went forward, he would force Lu Mei to do something desperate, and then he would be exposed. As long as he kept a safe distance from Lu Mei, everything would be fine. Do you really want to know where Yu Qianqiu and Nanhai Nongzhu are? Yu Qianqiu asked coldly. The black fire in his body instantly condensed to the extreme, and suddenly pressed down on Lu Mei. Others naturally could not feel the targeted pressure. Unexpectedly, Lu Mei did not react at all. Yu Qianqiu thought it was bad. Then he remembered that since Lu Mei came from the underworld, he must have crossed the fire sea of the underworld and was not afraid of the black fire at all. He was right, but Lu Mei was not afraid at all. Such a heavy death qi could only be felt by people at the level of underworld sage. As a netherworld knight, he could not condense such a heavy death qi. What scared him the most was that he saw 2 burning black flames jumping in Lu Mei's eyes. However, as Yu Qianqiu quickly restrained the black fire, the 2 burning black flames disappeared again. It was indescribably weird. Lu Mei intuitively thought that Lu Mei's cultivation was higher than his, and it was very likely that he also came from the underworld. His heart was pounding. However, he soon realized that something was wrong. The human aura around the other party was very heavy. It was obvious that he was someone from the human world. If they were from the underworld, they wouldn't be able to do anything to him. He was the messenger of the underworld emperor and Lady Hei Qi who in the underworld dared to make things difficult for him. Even if they were from the celestial world, they still had to respect the emperor of the underworld and Lady Blackpool. But that's not right. People from the celestial realm don't have human qi. That's strange. Amidst his doubts, he calmed himself down and nodded. I can tell that you aren't an ordinary person. I'm here by the order of the Underworld Emperor and the decree of the Lady of Blackpool. I hope you can cooperate with me and tell me the information about those 2 people. The politeness of his tone almost made the group of people's eyeballs fall out of their sockets. The title of this sovereign had also changed to this envoy. Nongzhu is even more stunned. It turns out that this strange green-robed man is easily frightened. He only bullies the weak and fears the strong. Ziyi's face was filled with admiration. However, Furong didn't think it was a big deal. He had always believed that Yu Qianqiu was the best. Seeing him like this, Yu Qianqiu finally felt more at ease. It seemed that the other party still had some scruples about the black fire. Otherwise, his attitude wouldn't have changed so quickly. What he didn't know was that the other party didn't have scruples about the black fire at all. He didn't even think about the black fire. Instead, he was worried about the vigorous dead qi and thought that Furong was a master. In fact, if Yu Qianqiu used the blue fire, the other party would really be afraid. Although the power of the blue fire was not as powerful as the black fire or the legendary purple fire, it was still a raging fire of extreme yang. It was the natural nemesis of the underworld cultivators. Ghost cultivators or meditation cultivators with low cultivation couldn't resist the blue fire at all. They would be burned to death immediately. The power of the earth fire in his body could make the ghost king Meng Yan have a hard time resisting it. Not to mention the blue fire of the three true fire, which could be said to be the nemesis of the underworld. Some things were so strange. People thought they couldn't play any role, but in fact, they were very useful. Everything in the world usually had a fixed number. It was the truth that one thing could subdue another. Everything had its own value. As the saying went, lonely yin couldn't grow, and lonely yang couldn't grow. One's loss and the other's gain. The operation of the way of heaven was called balance. Whoever broke the balance would be punished by the way of heaven in order to maintain the balance. Oh. So you were sent by the Emperor of the Underworld and Madame Hei Qi, sorry for not recognizing you. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands, as if he had heard of the Emperor of the Underworld and Madame Hei Qi. However, he had heard of the Emperor of the Underworld. It was estimated that there were very few people in the cultivation world who hadn't heard of him. As for Madame Hei Qi, who the hell knew who she was? LV Mei was emboldened. So what if your cultivation is high? Do you dare to disrespect the Emperor of the Underworld and Madame Hei Qi? But he still cupped his hands and said, please tell me the whereabouts of those two people. Yu Qianqiu nodded and said, I can tell you, but I'm afraid that you can't get in even if you find the place. I advise you to give up the idea of looking for those two people. Even he said so. Could it be a very powerful place? LV Mei was taken aback. Then he shook his head and said, it doesn't matter. As long as I try my best, I have a clear conscience. His words sounded nice, but in fact, he had already made up his mind. If it was a powerful place, he wouldn't have to look for those two people. He just wanted to find Bai Changchun and get back the stolen things. The most important thing now was to finish this formality and leave as soon as possible. He didn't want to talk nonsense with this strange guy. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and pointed with a smile, saying, go straight to the east, fly over the land, and then cross the vast sea. There is a vast land sealed by a great formation. Few people can enter it. It is called the East Holy Land. There are many highly skilled swordsmen there. Even my cultivation is not worth mentioning there. Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu are there. Then he cupped his hands and said, I wish you good luck, emissary of hell. Hearing this, Nongzhu's eyes brightened. She realized that this was a good way to solve the problem once and for all. Tricking him to go to a place where he couldn't enter, he naturally wouldn't be angry. At that time, he would have to go back to the underworld obediently. The two of them didn't have a deep hatred with the underworld. Would the underworld have to find them? Impossible. That would be too degrading. Nongzhu didn't believe that the legendary emperor of the underworld was so petty. But he was worried about Bai Changchun. But there was no other way. He would save as many people as he could. He could only do this for the time being. The group of demigod lords nodded secretly and exchanged glances. This method was much better than Pei Fong's flattering method. But to them, if something happened to Bai Changchun, it might not be a bad thing. Only Zi thought of big liar again. Pei Fong's face darkened. Why didn't he think of this method in the beginning? This so-called emissary of hell obviously knew nothing about the human world. He was very easy to trick. Thinking of his fawning manner and comparing it to Yu Qianzhou's calm and confident manner, he immediately felt a little embarrassed. It would be embarrassing if this spread out. He was a master at the final stage of demigod realm. He was not even as calm as a junior. He couldn't understand why this emissary of hell seemed to be afraid of Yu Qianzhou. He looked at Yu Qianzhou and was slightly stunned. He couldn't see through his cultivation. Was this the reason? Green Eyebrows was stunned for a while. After hearing Yu Qianzhou's words, he felt that safety was the first priority. He was already prepared to not look for them. He couldn't lose his life just because he came to the human world. Anyway, Mrs. Blackpool didn't know who Nanhai Nongzhu and Yu Qianzhou were. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for telling me. Goodbye." Yu Qianzhou also cupped his hands and said with a smile, "I won't see you out." However, just when everyone thought that the strange green-robed man was about to leave, they suddenly saw the strange green-robed man's face sink. His eyes suddenly stared at Yu Qianzhou, and he said in a stern voice filled with killing intent, "What's your name?" Yu Qianzhou was shocked. He didn't know where he had exposed himself, but he replied calmly, "I'm Zhang San." "Is there a problem?" "I think you're Li Si." "How dare you make fun of me? How dare you?" Green Eyebrows screamed. Damn it. He also knew the legend of Zhang San and Li Si. Although Yu Qianzhou didn't know how the other party found out the flaw, he knew that he had been exposed. When he was about to release his divine sense to take Nanhai Nongzhu and the other two away, a white figure suddenly appeared in front of him. It was Wen Lanfeng. Green Eyebrows screamed, "It seems that there are many people who want to die." Wen Lanfeng held the giant silver sword in his hand, and his body glowed with monstrous fighting intent. Even the wind around him was stirred up. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and he said without looking back, "I'm here. Nanhai Nongzhu, take them away. If I die, I'll have to trouble you to take care of the Wen clan." His indomitable killing intent was surging. The second strongest man in the world knew that he was no match for him, but he still wanted to risk his life. If it weren't for the fact that the situation was unclear and he was worried that no one would protect Lu Yanqing, he wouldn't have watched Yin Baikong die like that. Lu Yanqing wanted to save Yin Baikong several times, but he forced her to stop. For him, Lu Yanqing's safety was the most important thing. Now that he found that the green-robed man wouldn't harm others for no reason, Lu Yanqing should be fine. Seeing that even a junior like Yu Qianzhou could face it bravely, and he had promised to take care of Yu Qianzhou in front of Bai Changchun, how could he stay out of it now that Yu Qianzhou was in danger? To be able to stand at the peak of the cultivation world, who didn't have a sense of pride in their hearts. They fought and fought, but they were unwilling to submit to others. No matter how cunning and selfish Yin Baikong was, he would rather die than submit at the critical moment. That magnificent feat of self-detonating his dantian had made Wen Lanfeng's blood boil, and he almost couldn't suppress it. Now that it was time to fulfill his promise to Bai Changchun, he stood up without hesitation. Even if he died, he would fight for his reputation, for his dignity. He didn't want to hide like a turtle and let that woman look down on him. Wen Lanfeng. Nanhai Nongzhu and Lu Yanqing shouted almost at the same time, and their tone was very anxious. Yu Qianzhou was speechless. It seemed that he had to bring 2 more people with him, and 2 more people would know his secret. Just as he released his divine sense, there was suddenly a sonorous hum that sounded like a vajra subduing a demon. It was cold and arrogant, and it shook people's hearts. Yu Qianzhou's legs went soft, and he almost couldn't stand still. Chapter 658. Yu Qianzhou was just about to curse that scary bastard in his heart, but he suddenly felt something was wrong. The voice was so familiar. He turned around and saw a man standing on the edge of the collapsed God of Wealth Peak, which was as if it had been cut by a knife or an axe. The man stood upright, with his green robe fluttering gently in the wind. With his cultivation, although he couldn't see the man's face clearly, he was too familiar with his majestic and arrogant standing posture. And that signature green robe. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. The old guy came out of the mountain. In fact, he was not the only one who was scared by the cold snort. Many of the low-level cultivators hiding behind the God of Wealth peak were so scared that they even fell down on the spot, with their ears buzzing. As for the group of deity transformation stage lords, their hearts trembled when they heard that cold snort, which sounded like a Vajra subduing a demon. It was not the first time they heard it. Every time they heard it, what happened next was extremely terrifying. Everyone looked up at the top of the mountain. Yu Qianqiu couldn't see it clearly, but the cultivators of the deification stage saw it clearly. They were all horrified. It was really Bai Changchun, he actually came here. Nongzhu was shocked and murmured, "Why is he here? It's going to be interesting." Ziyi's knuckles turned pale, but she was very excited and her eyes were shining. It turned out that Elder Bai, whom she admired the most, was here. Now, someone was going to teach that green-robed monster a lesson. She was very confident in Bai Changchun. In her eyes, Elder Bai was an invincible legend. LV Mei was not a fool. From everyone's reaction, he could tell that the guy who stood on the top of the mountain and looked into the distance without even looking at them was definitely not an ordinary person. Especially the cold snort just now, his cultivation must be extraordinary. Then he called, "Fatty Pei." Pei Fong made a sound of, "ah," and turned around to look at him. LV Mei glanced at the God of Wealth peak coldly and asked, "Who is that old guy up there? Please use your brain, who else could it be?" Pei Fong shook his head with a bitter smile and did not answer. When Lan Feng, who was confronting Lu Mei, lost his surging battle intent and killing intent. He said to Lu Mei indifferently, "He's the one you're looking for, the world's #1 expert, Bai Changchun." Bai Changchun was here. There was no need for him to risk his life to protect Yu Qianqiu and the others. Bai Changchun? Green Eyebrows was startled and suddenly stared at the peak of the mountain. He smiled evilly and said, "You can wear out iron shoes in fruitless search, only to find it by chance." He actually sent himself to his death. That's good, it saves me the trouble of looking for him everywhere. When Lan Feng sneered, "Don't speak too early. I hope you still have a chance to return to the netherworld." He was the only person in the cultivation world who had survived from Bai Changchun's hands twice, so he naturally knew how terrifying Bai Changchun was. The God of Wealth sword? It's Yin Baikong's God of Wealth sword. How could it be in his hands? The soul formation expert suddenly became restless. Bai Changchun, who was on the God of Wealth peak, slowly put down his hands. He was holding a sword in his hand and silently looked at it with a solemn expression. This sword was extremely familiar to all of the soul formation final stage cultivators, especially Pei Fong and the other soul formation final stage cultivators. They were certain that the sword in Bai Changchun's hand was the God of Wealth sword that had followed Yin Baikong for many years. Everyone immediately came to a realization. Yin Baikong's God of Wealth sword was in the direction of the demon domain. Bai Changchun must have encountered it on his way here and brought it back. On the God of Wealth peak, Sikongju and Jing Yuankong were frightened by Bai Changchun's sudden appearance. Only now did they realize that the sword in Bai Changchun's hand was actually their master's sword. The two of them looked at each other and quickly walked behind Bai Changchun. They knelt down and kowtowed with sobs. "Senior Bai, please avenge our master, Senior Bai." Beside the cliff, the mountain wind was strong. However, the green robe that was fluttering in the wind suddenly stopped. It was as if it was made of stone and iron. It was as if it was connected to its owner's emotions. Bai Changchun faced heaven and earth quietly. His unmoving thin back didn't turn around. His back was facing the two people who were kneeling down. His face was as calm as water and no expression could be seen. A sharp gleam flashed across his eyes and then they became calm again. His eyes seemed to be uninterested in anything. He only stared at the God of Wealth in his hand and said indifferently, "I was right. Otherwise, you wouldn't have abandoned your sword." His voice was like that of an ordinary old man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life. It was quiet, indifferent, serene and unperturbed. Hearing this voice, no one would believe that this was the number one expert whose name shook the cultivation world. Junior is useless and can't avenge my master. Please avenge my master, Senior Bai. Sikong-ju kowtowed once again. This time, he was kowtowing heavily on the ground, causing the ground to produce loud bangs. Jing Yuankong kowtowed non-stop along with his senior brother. Among the cultivators who were hiding behind the god of Wealth Peak, many of them had heard the conversation. After holding their breaths and concentrating, someone suddenly exclaimed, Bai Changchun is here. The number one expert in the world, Bai Changchun, is here. I heard his voice. There was an indescribable surprise in his tone. The news spread quickly behind the mountain, making the cultivators extremely excited. This caused the large group of cultivators to become extremely excited. They did not expect that the elusive number one expert under the heavens would come and see them. Although they hadn't seen Bai Changchun before, they didn't know where they got the confidence that Bai Changchun would be able to take care of that arrogant green-robed man. It didn't matter if that green-robed man was from the celestial world or the netherworld world. They believed that Bai Changchun would win. To them, the name Bai Changchun was an undefeatable legend in the cultivation world. He was an immortal legend that only existed in legends. He was a monumental monument that no one in the cultivation world could surpass in the past or the future. Ever since they stepped into the cultivation world, they had heard of such a person. He was ethereal and mysterious, and they could never see his true appearance. But every single person they met who talked about this legendary figure had a face full of reverence and sincerity. Over time, this legendary name was engraved in every cultivator's heart, accompanying every cultivator as they grew. That was a legendary figure that every cultivator dreamed of meeting since they stepped into the cultivation world. They tossed and turned restlessly in bed, longing to meet him, but today, that legendary immortal legend didn't disappoint everyone. Just at the critical moment when the underworld messenger was acting arrogantly in the mortal world, he was like a rising sun in the darkness, appearing just in time and giving everyone hope. No matter what kind of enmity everyone had, when faced with bullying and oppression from the outside world, they would always feel a sense of solidarity against a common enemy. Especially those disciples of the World Chamber of Commerce, they hoped that someone could help them vent their hatred. They were perturbed and uneasy. They really wanted to meet that immortal legend. If they missed this opportunity, they would probably never be able to eat or sleep in peace for the rest of their lives. But at this time, they were more or less afraid. Could they go out? But at this time, someone took the lead and threw caution to the wind. One person flew up with a swoosh, circled around God of Wealth Peak, and quickly landed on the edge of the mountain surrounding Cornucopia with his heart thumping wildly. With someone taking the lead, countless figures flew out from behind God of Wealth Peak like locusts, landing on the edge of the mountain surrounding Cornucopia one after another. Each of them were so excited that their gazes jumped around, desperately trying to see that immortal legend on God of Wealth Peak. But with their cultivation, almost no one could see clearly. They could only faintly see a green-robed man standing upright on the mountain peak, but unfortunately, they couldn't see his appearance clearly. Is that the green-robed man? It should be. I saw him too. Although no one could see clearly, that green-robed figure gave everyone incomparably strong confidence. Their tone was one more excited than the other, completely forgetting the situation where they had to flee in a sorry state. The people at the foot of the mountain stared at the top, but Bai Changchun only looked at the sword in his hand. Hearing the sounds of kowtowing behind him, Bai Changchun was silent for a moment, then asked, "How did Yin Baikong die?" The two of them straightened their bodies, their faces filled with grief and indignation. Sikong-ju described the process of how his master died in battle in detail. When he talked about how Yin Baikong, a dignified soul formation final stage cultivator, self-destructed his dantian to perish together with the enemy, Bai Changchun frowned. He put down the sword in his hand, and his gaze locked onto the green-robed man at the foot of the mountain for the first time. At the foot of the mountain, Lu Mei and Bai Changchun's gazes met, then immediately laughed sharply. What arrogance! Let me see just how high this so-called world's number one expert can be. His figure disappeared without a sound, then suddenly appeared on the opposite side of the mountain peak, hovering in the air, face to face with Bai Changchun less than 10 meters away. The atmosphere in cornucopia instantly froze. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the top, knowing that the inevitable moment had arrived. Some people had the foresight to know that the foot of the mountain might not be safe, so they quickly flew to the edge of the mountain to observe. Soon, even Yu Qianqiu and the rest also moved away. The foot of the mountain was suddenly left in a mess, and not a single figure could be seen. Lu Mei sized up the green-robed elder, and his heart skipped a beat. He realized that he actually couldn't see through the other party's cultivation. But when he thought about how he also couldn't see through Yu Qianqiu's cultivation at the foot of the mountain, he immediately felt reassured. If it wasn't for that fatty secretly transmitting his voice to him, he would have been fooled. Just think about it, how could there be someone in the world who could surpass the cultivation of a netherworld knight? You're Bai Changchun? Lu Mei sneered sharply. Bai Changchun only glanced at him indifferently, then swung the sword in his hand backwards and said indifferently, "You too, keeping Bai Kong's sword well." The two people who were kneeling hurriedly stood up. Sikong Ju went over to take the sword and retreated with both hands. Then, he heard Bai Changchun say indifferently with his back facing them, "It wasn't easy to establish the World Commerce Association. It's Yin Bai Kong's life's work. You two have to manage it well. Whether it's for the cultivators of the cultivation world or the mortals of the secular world, the World Commerce Association should have the goal of benefiting the world. Otherwise, there's no need for it to exist. Do the two of you understand what I mean?" Sikong Ju and Jing Yuankong looked at each other, then bowed in unison and said, "Junior understands." Hearing this, Pei Fong, Qi Zhejuan, and Ouyang Da's expressions all changed. With Bai Changchun's words, even if Yin Bai Kong died, they could forget about attacking the World Commerce Association in the future. No one would dare to do anything to the World Commerce Association. Unless Bai Changchun died in the hands of the green-robed man. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.